My name is Bill Truex. I'm the chairman of the Board of County Commissioners, and we did a water quality summit a few years ago when we were having such drastic issues with algae, red tide, that type of thing. And I felt talking with Brandon, and he's newer to the community, but he's been working his tail off trying to make sure that he's reaching out to stakeholders in our community, and I know several people that have mentioned that he's done just that. But this opportunity to present to the citizens of Charlotte County is extremely important, both from an educational perspective as to what we're finding and also as to who all we work with or interact with to try to improve the water quality in Charlotte County. A lot of these basins, tributaries, are very sensitive, and if anybody knows that I've been here for quite a while, there's people who've been here longer than I have. I've been here 31 years. We have folks on our commission that have been here a lot longer than that, Commissioner DeSeo and Commissioner Doherty. And, we all see a big change coming, and we've been watching this, and we've been trying to make forward-thinking decisions that will improve the area and take into consideration what's happening with growth and how we maintain water quality in the area. So today we have 3 different panels that you're going to hear some really good information from. And I'm going to say thank you again for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Brandon Moody. Brandon?
Good morning, everyone, and again, thank you for being here. For those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Brandon Moody. I'm the Water Quality Manager for Charlotte County. Before we get started on our sessions, I just want to throw out a brief reminder about the Q&A process today. So we're handling questions and answers at the end of each session. So there'll be 3 Q&A portions, one at the end of each set of presentations. If you would like to ask a question, please fill out a card at the table you walked by on the way in here. In order to give us time to gather the questions and organize them, we're asking that you submit any questions that you would like to ask of the Session 1 panelists by 9:45. Session 2 panelists, please turn in your questions by 10:45, and Session 3 panelists, please turn them in by 11:45. That'll help us to have a little bit of time to kind of get them all straight so that we can ask them in as orderly manner as possible. Also, please keep in mind that we're fairly limited on time. We'll get through as many questions as we can. If we don't get to your question, please make sure that your email address is written on the card so that we can get back to you to address your concern at a future date. So with that, I'd like to invite up to the stage our Session 1 panelists. One moment. Sorry about that. For Session 1, we're going to present a few examples of the many initiatives being undertaken by our universities and state and federal agencies. Joining us are Dr. Christine Angelini with the University of Florida's Center for Coastal Solutions, Betty Stogler with Florida Sea Grant and our NOAA HAB liaison, and Dr. Michael Parsons from Florida Gulf Coast University. So a little bit about our presenters for Session 1. Dr. Angelini is the director of the Center for Coastal Solutions and an associate professor in the Department of Environmental Engineering Sciences at the University of Florida. Dr. Angelini received her bachelor's in science and marine biology from Brown University and her PhD in biology from the University of Florida. She is an experimental community ecologist, and her research focuses on resolving how and why coastal ecosystems, including salt marshes, oyster reefs, and coastal dunes are changing, and then applying this knowledge to the design of ecosystem restoration. She is the author of nearly 70 peer-reviewed publications and was the recipient of an NSF Career Award, National Academy of Sciences Gulf Coastal Early Career Award, and Coastal and Estuarine Research Foundation's Early Career Award. Our second speaker will be Betty Stogler. Those of you who have been in the area for a long time probably knows Betty's name very well. She's been a pillar of the environmental education and outreach and science community here in Charlotte Harbor. She is currently now the NOAA Harmful Algal Bloom Liaison, which is a federal and state partnership position between NOAA's Sea Grant, the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, and Coast Watch programs. As the Harmful Algal Bloom Liaison, her work focuses on mitigating harmful algal blooms nationwide by helping to expand and improve forecasting tools through stakeholder collaboration and engagement. She's located in Florida and serves as the Extension Specialist for Florida Sea Grant at the University of Florida. And prior to that, she was the Florida Sea Grant agent for Charlotte County, where her work involved developing comprehensive marine and natural resource educational programs that focused on sustainable coastal communities and habitat water quality issues. Betty holds a master's in environmental science with an emphasis on coastal disturbance ecology from Florida Gulf Coast University. Our final speaker for this session is Dr. Michael Parsons with Florida Gulf Coast University. Dr. Parsons is a professor of marine science in the Water School and the director of Florida Gulf Coast's Vester Field Station on Little Hickory Island near Bonita Springs. In addition to his teaching duties focused on marine ecology, Dr. Parsons has built a very successful research career, receiving over $20 million in extramural funding to study harmful algal blooms and ecosystem health. His work has been cited over 3,000 times in scientific literature, demonstrating the quality of his work. And in addition to working with other researchers around the state to find solutions to our algal bloom problems, he was appointed to the Blue-Green Algae Task Force by Governor Ron DeSantis back in 2019 to work to reduce the impacts of harmful algae in our region. So thank you all very much for joining us this morning. We're going to start with Dr. Angelini.
Okay, let me just, a little shorter than the average speaker. Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Brandon, for the warm welcome and granting me this just wonderful opportunity to engage with you and your very invested community that I see before me. So trekking from landlocked Gainesville, Florida, where I live, to this beautiful coastal scene is similar to the trek that I often embark on when I seek calm, rejuvenation, and a deeper connection to my colleagues, my friends, my husband, and my children. And for me, this propelled migration to the coast is a deeply ingrained instinct that sustains me as a person and my most valuable relationships. And I suspect that the coast is similarly valuable to all of you, and a key reason underpinning your decision to live here in Charlotte County and the surrounding areas. And for many of us, it's the feel of the waves and the smell of the salt water and the sounds of the waves that relax our minds and our bodies in ways that nothing else can. And the wonderful bursts of joy that we see when we witness wildlife foraging in the shoals always feels like a privileged moment, no matter how many times we experience these special scenes. And of course, the ever-changing ways that the light and the sky interact with the water never ceases to inspire, amaze, and soothe us. And all of this about the coast enriches us, each individually, and its steady presence is what boosts the quality of all of our lives. And I hold such value in this grounding and revitalizing power of our coast that I've dedicated my scientific career, as Brandon mentioned, to understanding how these systems are organized and why they are changing. And more recently, my passion for the coast has propelled me and my saltiest colleagues at the University of Florida to found and breathe life into the Center for Coastal Solutions. And our vision in founding this center is to leave a legacy of real improvement in the health of our coasts, a future in which our coastal waters are cleaner and our ecosystems are more vibrant tomorrow than they are today. And in support of this vision, we're mobilizing the awesome intellectual talent and research infrastructure we have at the University of Florida to deliver world-class science, technology, policy, and communications that collectively inform the solutions we need to more meaningfully address many of the most pressing challenges facing our coasts. So you might ask, why is something like the Center for Coastal Solutions needed? especially in a place where there's such rich capital like you see here in Charlotte Harbor. And what I would say is that the coast is an incredibly complex place that needs our best and our brightest minds working on it. And this is because our coastal environment is where we have sort of fresh water that's draining from the land, colliding with our ocean tides and currents in really dynamic ways. This constant moving and mixture is never the same any given hour, any given day, any given year. It's always changing. And this really obscures the root causes of underlying challenges that we're facing in our coasts. It is really difficult to pinpoint what is the root cause of any given hazard that we see on any given day. And in addition, from more of a technical perspective, our coastal areas really need our best and brightest minds because we have large amounts of information that are being collected about our coastal environment, but drawing sufficient meaning from the resources and the data that we have at our fingertips or intelligence about what's going on at our coast still remains somewhat out of reach. And this, all of this is to say that we still have uncertainty about why our coast looks like the way that it does, and what actions we should take to sort of gear us towards a trajectory of improvement, as is the vision of our center. So how can we make more productive and proactive progress? And I would say that innovating solutions really requires that we activate our best and brightest minds, but we catapult this forward with using advanced computational infrastructure in order to sort of resolve the solutions we need for the future. So in particular, the sort of backbone of my program is building out this technological infrastructure and guiding this with some outstanding talent we have at the university. So first and foremost, we're building the following kind of technology ecosystem. We're building a state-of-the-art data intake pipeline that allows us to kind of gather, clean, and ingest all of the data resources that we have at our fingertips and integrate this into an actionable sort of data management system for a variety of applications. We're using approaches, including artificial intelligence, to fuse data from different sources into higher resolution data products so that we can see more of what's going on everywhere all the time by catalyzing the power of different data sources and integrating them into these more advanced products. Third, this data needs to get put into motion using Earth system models, and I'll give you an example later on in the talk about what I mean by this. But finally, we need to take this underlying infrastructure and really put it to work in the ways that we need to identify solutions. So by this, I mean we're building out what we call a digital twin ecosystem, which is a data modeling infrastructure that allows us to reconstruct what has happened during past water quality hazard events, understand what's happening in real time in day-to-day, and then activate this to not only forecast what may happen over the next few days, but also to simulate solutions. What are the infrastructure investments, such as septic to sewer conversion? What are the policy changes, such as fertilizer ordinances? And what are the management actions, such as implementation of large-scale shellfish restoration projects, or harnessing the ability of your local shellfish aquaculturists to put them to work to improve coastal waters? What is the timing, the sequence, and the location of these different efforts that we need for us to measurably see improvements? So what are the products that we can gain in building out this sort of underlying infrastructure? First, we can see the hazards everywhere all the time and in real time. And this is really vital for us to know kind of what is going on out there and with sort of higher confidence. It also prepares us to anticipate the future with a lot higher certainty than what we have today that enables more proactive decision-making and communications. It also, fundamentally, as a scientist, this is perhaps most important, is that we better understand the problems that we're facing. We can better resolve the root causes, and this gives us knowledge is power, as I think many of you will agree. And finally, we are now sort of equipped with the capabilities and the technology where we can really explore solutions at the scales and the level of complexity needed to really kind of make better informed decisions. So perhaps fortunately for all of you, we've identified Charlotte Harbor as the proving ground for building out this technology. My program started in October of 2022, and this is where we've started our work. And there's really 3 reasons for this. Number 1, this is a fabulous place to work. It's a fabulous place to live, I'm sure, and this is because of the rich and vibrant natural resources you have, the vibrant economy that's supported by them, as well as a really engaged community that I see even here before me. It's also a place that has its share of water quality and environmental health challenges. We've seen recent die-offs of seagrass in this system, and certainly you've seen your share of harmful algae blooms. This isn't dissimilar to what is happening in other places in Florida, but you've got your host of problems too. So it's a place that needs solutions, and holistic ones. And finally, this is a place from the last 1.5 years of my work that I realized is full of awesome human talent that are embedded in all of these different agencies. There's great monitoring infrastructure that's being maintained by the aquatic preserves and some of the other state agencies, but also entities like the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation that provides real-time monitoring data across the lower portions of your watershed. In fact, this is, I would say, the most data-rich region in the world. And if we want to build the technology that we're talking about at the Center for Coastal Solutions, we need a lot of data to do it. And this is the best place in the state for us to build out that infrastructure because we have the data to put to work. And finally, communications capabilities that are also supported by entities like the Charlotte Harbor National Estuary Partnership. So let's talk a little bit about what you're sort of trying to do here in Charlotte Harbor. And really the crux of the biggest outstanding question is where and what kinds of actions should be taken to improve the trajectory of this harbor from one that may be on somewhat shaky ground about whether it's going into a sort of trajectory of decline or one where you're really seeing signs of improvement. And this is not easy. This is a watershed that intercepts fresh water from 7 watersheds that span almost 17% of the land area of Florida are draining into your backyard through the sort of the watersheds that drain into this system. And answering this kind of overarching question is challenging because the data we need to put to work is distributed across many different agencies that are all collecting data in different formats. It's all over the place, and it's really difficult. It's a huge time investment to get this data to start to work together. And in a similar way, the existing models that we have to put that data to work in the system are distributed across different modeling frameworks, and they don't communicate with one another. And this is just an example of 3 models that are sort of being interconnected by our program in the lower part of this estuary. So they're all communicating with one another, and we can see the system as a whole, from the watershed to the estuary and the ocean. And so what I would say is that forward progress in your region and in many other regions requires a big data Earth system modeling approach. We need to build the underlying technology infrastructure needed to really resolve the complexity of your system. And so we're actually building that right now as of the start of our program. We've been out collecting new data where we know there are data gaps related to how water flows in this system, some elements of water chemistry and biology, as well as how toxins are moving through the coastal food web. We've been building a world-class data intake pipeline that is allowing us to scrape and clean and ingest and make immediately available for use for different applications, the data that we have in this rich region of the world. And finally, we're blending data together from different sources to do things like better detect red tide. So we put our computer scientists to work to integrate in the water red tide samples with remote sensing data, and we are already improving red tide detection with 20% better accuracy than any of the existing products that we have at our fingertips today. On the modeling front, we've been building a fantastic and now well-validated 3-dimensional model of the Charlotte Harbor Estuary. This is a simulation of water tracking and sort of movement through the estuary system, in which you can see how long does it take for water that's sitting up in our backyard in the upper part of the harbor to ultimately migrate out to the coast and get diluted with ocean water relative to water that's sort of maybe released from middle and lower regions of this estuary. And this is a really powerful tool for us to not only sort of forecast what has happened in the future or what may happen over the next few days, but also to start to simulate sort of solutions. And we're enhancing the sophistication of the system, in particular by integrating increased amounts of data from the Peace River Basin in the coming months. And so I just want to give one example of some of the scientific discoveries that we're coming up with as a result of our overall program. My postdoc is in the audience today, Dr. Miles Medina, and he worked with some other colleagues, including Dave Tomasco, who some of you may know from the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program, and Eric Milbrandt from the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation, to test two main hypotheses. First is that nutrient-enriched discharges that are coming out of the Caloosahatchee River are intensifying Karenia brevis, or red tide blooms, near Charlotte Harbor. And second, that this influence is extending upstream, not only to Lake Okeechobee, but also up to the Kissimmee River Basin. And using some advanced causality analyses and putting this rich data infrastructure that we have in this region to work, we in fact found evidence that these two hypotheses are well supported by our work. And you can go talk to Miles about his paper if you're interested in learning more. He'll be in the lobby. So all of this is to say we have a lot of wonderful things to protect here. We need excellent people put to work on this, and I'm really encouraged that the University of Florida is now part of the sort of the network of those working in this region. I think we can make a lot of progress together. So with that, please feel free to reach out to our Associate Director of Partnerships and Communications, Kim Prince, who's over by the door here. She's a key communicator for our program. To learn more, we're on social media at UF Coastal across the major platforms. And we also have a newsletter that you can subscribe to off of our main website. So please feel free to keep up to date with what's going on in our program. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to engaging on questions shortly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Angelini. Next up, we're going to have Betty Stogler talking about advances in harmful algal bloom tracking, prediction, and communication services. So, I believe it's the play button. Loading up the, he's going to load up the PowerPoint, and I think you just hit. I think it's that button to advance.
Cool.
Aha, all right. Good morning, everyone. And again, thank you to Charlotte County for inviting me to participate this morning. All right, so it was 3 years ago that was the last time that we all came together here at the Event Center. And that particular Water Quality Summit was on the heels of a 17-month red tide bloom. That bloom affected 23 coastal counties in Florida, and it happened to coincide during the summer months of 2018 with the releases of blue-green algae through the Caloosahatchee River to the coast. So needless to say, we were all a little frustrated, we were all very exhausted. But since that time, a lot has happened in terms of harmful algal blooms. And just to name a few of those things and the mechanisms that put them into play, in 2019, the governor reinitiated the Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force, which had been dormant for several years. He created the Blue-Green Algae Task Force. He also created the Red Tide Technology and Mitigation Initiative, and I always have to look at that to get it right, but that is a partnership between Mote Marine Laboratory and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission to really be able to pilot and move mitigation ideas from an idea to mesocosms, or like from the lab to tanks, to bigger tanks, to bigger tanks, and then eventually out into real world scenarios, along with 6 years of funding. And then in preparation for all of those things to come online, because we knew that they were going to come online, Florida Sea Grant brought together 75 of the best researchers in Florida and around the nation to talk about Karenia brevis red tide and microcystis, the blue-green algae that is prevalent in Lake Okeechobee, to discuss what we know about these organisms and to identify research priorities and prioritize those priorities. So that was really designed to be a jumping off place for these other three newly funded initiatives. And so it provided a really nice collaboration and opportunities for discussion and to know what everyone else was doing and to come to some consensus. Since that time, a lot of projects have been funded. Just to talk about the Red Tide Technology and Mitigation Initiative, in the last 3 years, 25 mitigation projects have been funded, and a handful of those are showing progress and are moving forward, and the next round of research proposals or requests for research proposals recently went out, so we'll be seeing some more funded projects as well. Now, I was asked to talk about observing, tracking, forecasting, and communication. And right on the communication front, I do want to say, last year, I, along with some of my colleagues, published a Red Tide communication plan for the state of Florida. And as part of that, we conducted 11 focus groups. And some of you may have participated in those focus groups. We conducted focus groups with the research community, with natural resource professionals, public health professionals, small businesses, hospitality, the media, and the public. And what we heard over and over and over again, no matter who we were talking to, was how important these water quality summits were. And it wasn't just in Charlotte County, although I think Charlotte County was the first to have a water quality summit, but several other counties followed suit. And people felt that that was really important and that that needed to become institutionalized and continue. And so I do want to congratulate Charlotte County for doing just that. Okay, so when we think about red tide observing or monitoring, typically, this is what comes to mind. Somebody going out, collecting a water sample, it goes back to the lab, and some trained microscopist sits at a microscope and counts Corynea brevis cells on the slide or whatever other harmful algal bloom that we're interested in. And this is certainly the gold standard for identifying harmful algal blooms and monitoring them over time. And it's one that Florida has a really good monitoring network of. But there are a lot of other monitoring techniques or observations. And so this slide is kind of an old graphic from NOAA, but it shows a lot of the other assets or ways that we can observe harmful algal blooms. And what's important to note about these is that there's multiple different types. So you can have, moored sensors, you can have equipment on boats, you can have underwater gliders, we use satellites, planes, and all of these are important. They're all collecting different pieces of information that is important. But since that 2018-19 harmful algal bloom year that was so devastating for us, a lot of this monitoring, which was really geared towards event response, has now become routine monitoring. It's also expanded. Christine alluded to this. We have great monitoring now from Tampa Bay, Sarasota Bay, and Charlotte Harbor out from the coast offshore, as well as in the estuary from those water sample collection. And so we're getting a lot of really important data. It's also important to note that the technology has gotten a lot better. So we have more partners with more technology, we're getting more observations, and also the scientists are getting better at using the technology, and I'll give you a couple of examples in a second. So to give you an idea of why these different types of observations are important and that there's no one best solution, On the left here, this is showing chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is a color pigment that is contained in all plants. So if we're in the ocean, when we talk about chlorophyll, we're talking about algae. And in the open ocean, algae is the source of almost all color in the ocean. So on the left, if you can picture, like if you were to take like a cube of the ocean from top to bottom, this is that three-dimensional look of what it might look like. So algae is not like all across the surface. Different ocean processes are going to kind of group it together or spread it apart. And algae will move up and down in the water column based upon where those nutrients are and the availability of sunlight. And so you can see in this picture that under the water's surface, a ways down, there's a high concentration of chlorophyll. In the middle picture is what you might get from a satellite. Now, satellites are not measuring chlorophyll directly. They measure the color, the reflectance, but you can see that you get really nice coverage across the water's surface. However, unlike this picture, which is a little deceiving, satellites can't measure chlorophyll at depth. So they can only measure down about as far as we can see into the water. So you're going to get really good coverage at the surface, but if those algae cells are underneath, we won't see them. On the right-hand side are some of the other equipment, and you can see that they can go and collect measurements all the way down at depth, but because of the they're either moored or whatever, we're not going to get that great spatial coverage at the surface. The benefit also of these equipment on the right is that a lot of times they're carrying multiple sensors. So in addition to chlorophyll, you might be getting a lot of other parameters. So the satellite images can direct some of these other sampling efforts. Some of these other sampling efforts can validate the satellite imagery that we're getting, and these other measuring efforts can also carry additional equipment. So we need both of them. Now, in an open ocean, I mentioned that chlorophyll is the predominant source of color, but as you move closer to the coast, it gets really confusing, because there are a lot of other color sources. And those of us who live in Punta Gorda or Port Charlotte, we know that we have a very brown estuary because there's a lot of color. And so it becomes really complicated to use satellites in these as you move closer to shore. But the satellites are getting better, or the equipment on the satellites are getting better. And what I mean by that is that the amount of bands, so satellites are measuring across the color spectrum. So if you have 5 bands, you're measuring 5 places along that color spectrum. Think about all the colors in the rainbow. If you have 10 bands, you're getting 10 measurements. And so our newer satellites that have gone up since 2016 are measuring far more places along that color wavelength, or the wavelength of different colors. And they're measuring more wavelengths in the red and near infrared range. And as a result, we can use algorithms to remove some of the interference that we're getting from things like the tannins and sediments that occur because they don't reflect in those higher wavelengths. And so these are a couple of products that are based on some of the newer satellites. Not only do they remove those other interferences, but they also specialize on the types of algae that the scientists are interested in. So in the top image, this is actually Lake Erie, but this is a Cyanobacterial Index. Cyanobacteria, by the way, is the same thing as blue-green algae. Those two words are synonymous. So the Cyanobacterial Index is looking at blue-green algae in Lake Erie. The same Cyanobacterial Index is used in Lake Okeechobee and is actually used across the nation. At the bottom, we're looking at fluorescence. Cyanobacteria do not fluoresce, so we could hone down to just those organisms, dinoflagellates and diatoms, that do fluoresce. And so you can see for Charlotte Harbor, this was during the 2021 red tide bloom. And out along the coast, you can see the red tide really well. But one thing to point out about satellites is that they can't detect species. So if you looked at this image, you might think that that was red tide in the Tampa Bay and Charlotte Harbor estuary, but it takes somebody that's trained in the biology of harmful algal blooms to know that the estuaries would have been much too fresh during those months to support Karenia brevis red tide. So this was some other type of algae. And I'll point out, and I think you guys have probably all heard this before, all algae is not bad. All algae is not harmful. Most algae is good. So when we see algae in our estuaries, don't be concerned, because that is the foundation of life. And that's what makes our estuaries productive. Only a handful are harmful, and certainly the Karenia brevis or red tide along the coast was. All right, I mentioned that the Cyanobacterial Index was used across the nation now, and this is a product that if you're an Android user, you can actually download on your app. If you're an Apple user like me, you have to go to the website. But it's called Cyan, and it's a partnership of several federal agencies, and you can look at smaller lakes across the nation. Now, you're not going to be able to see lakes in Charlotte County because those are predominantly stormwater ponds, very much too small for a satellite to see. But if you are interested in what's happening in the Peace River watershed, for instance, up in the headwaters, you can see that. So where I put the arrow, that is Lake Hancock. That is at the northern end of our Peace River watershed. All right, I want to touch a little bit on forecasting and some of the advances in forecasting of harmful algal blooms. This is out of the University of South Florida. Bob Weisberg's group, some of you may have heard his name, and he's really interested in ocean currents, and his question in this research was, why does sometimes the loop current, which comes up from the Yucatan current, stay low and meet up with the Florida Strait, and why does sometimes it extend all the way up into the Gulf of Mexico? And so the paper that I cited here on the bottom from 2017 describes that process, and it's interesting, but what's even more interesting is how that relates to the severity of Karenia brevis red tide. And so what he found out working with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and this research is still ongoing, is that when the loop current stays low in the Gulf of Mexico, such as what you see on the two pictures on the bottom, the loop current tends to impede upon the West Florida shelf, which is that long shelf that extends out from Florida, right along the dry Tortugas. And as a result, it dumps tons of nutrients onto that West Florida shelf. Now, Karenia brevis does not have a competitive advantage when we have too many nutrients. So it needs some nutrients, but too many nutrients favors other types of algae, such as very large, fast-growing diatoms. So when we have this type of scenario in the late spring to early summer, we tend not to have severe blooms in the late summer to fall. However, when the loop current extends up into the Gulf of Mexico, it tends not to impede upon the West Florida shelf at the dry Tortugas. And as a result, the nutrients stay deplete, and those are the years that we tend to have more severe red tides. Now, going back over 2 decades, this has held true for all but about 4 or 5 years. So certainly there are other processes at play, and we know that things like the Saharan dust that comes across can play a role. We know that what comes out of like the Mississippi River can play a role. There's lots of different nutrients, but this is important information, particularly as we start thinking about mitigation strategies. We need to be prepared for these years when we expect to have more severe blooms. But right now, we don't have any viable mitigation strategies except to prepare people along the coast once red tide comes to shore. And of course, human health is our greatest concern when we do have red tide blooms or blue-green algae blooms. This is a daily forecast, so the last one was a seasonal forecast. This is a daily forecast, and it actually forecasts respiratory irritation. It is a project that was put together by the Gulf of Mexico Coastal Ocean Observing System and NOAA, and it uses a volunteer to collect a water sample. That water sample is then looked at under a microscope that is affixed with a Raspberry Pi 4.0 and a camera. The volunteer then takes a 30-second video. That video is uploaded to NOAA, where machine learning actually has learned to recognize the Karenia brevis cell and the swimming pattern, and it can come up with a cell count, which is then combined with wind speed and direction to provide a forecast that is updated every 3 hours as the National Weather Service updates their weather forecast. So this is to help people who live along the coast, who recreate along the coast, some of those beachside establishments, restaurants, hotels that are bringing people to the coast, because we know that when we have these red tide blooms, they're very patchy. And so not only can conditions change from like a half mile down the beach, but they also can change very quick throughout the day. So this gives you some confidence in when you can engage in activities at different locations. All right, I'm almost done. And this here has nothing to do with red tide or blue-green algae or any other type of harmful algal bloom. It is a screenshot of Weather Underground's forecast from the day I put this presentation together. And I put this up there because no matter whether you like Weather Underground or AccuWeather or WIC News or your local newspaper, when you get the weather forecast, you tend to get the same information that's packaged in a different way. It might be interpreted slightly different, but you don't have to worry about going to one location to get your temperature data and another location to get your precipitation data and another location to get your humidity data. It's all together. But that's not the case for red tide or blue-green algae information. And when we did our focus groups, we did 4 with the public, and we heard that loud and clear, and I want you to know that you were heard loud and clear. And so there's a lot of effort right now within the scientific community of thinking about how we can do better, because we need to do better to be able to package information so that it's understandable and it's easier for you to find, so that you're not linking out to a million different sites that are not connected, and so that you can get the information that you need to make informed decisions when we have these types of harmful algal bloom events. Whether we can get to something like the National Weather Service or Weather Underground or any of these weather sites, I can't tell you that, but I can tell you we can do better. And so I want to leave you with the new forecast from NOAA. I think this is a nice example of where we need to go in the interim. This is their HAB bulletin for the Gulf of Mexico. And what's nice about this is that they have pulled together all of the different important harmful algal bloom pieces of information, I guess I would say, to help you as a consumer plan your activities during a red tide bloom. When you look at this, these are thumbnails of actual sites. So what I'm seeing on the screen from the left, it was the blue dots were really the day that I grabbed that screen capture. The one on the right is a satellite image with the cell count information overlaid on it, and you can click them on and off. If you scroll down, you would get the Moat Marine Laboratories Beaches and Shores, or beaches, BCRS, whatever it is, Beach Conditions Reporting System, and a few other things. And so this is trying to pull it all together. It's not aggregating on one map, but at least you don't have to click between a million different websites. So again, your voices were heard, and I think moving forward, there's going to be a lot of effort to help improve that. And with that, I will thank you for your time. I know that I think I'm the only focused red tide, harmful algal bloom type talk today, so that's kind of an indication that, maybe the times have changed, but I was asked to give a talk on harmful algal blooms, and I decided to own it, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stogler. And a final presentation for this session we're having is Dr. Michael Parsons to talk about the Florida Gulf Coast University Water School overview, mission, and initiatives. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. So today I'm just going to basically introduce you to the water school if you're not familiar with it, and tell you about some of our different expertise and initiatives that we're undergoing. So it's more of an introduction, if you will. So basically, when you look at the water school, we have many different components. So I'm not going to go through each one of these pie slices. This was basically our executive director learning how to use PowerPoint. So he made this nice, he's an architect now. But we have different centers that focus on specific things. So there's going to be community engagement. We have the Coastal Watershed Institute that looks at, it's basically our research arm of the water school, looking at water quality and upland effects moving downstream. We have the Everglades Wetlands Research Institute that concentrates more on not only things in the Everglades, but looking at wetland ecology, wetland restoration projects. The Vester Field Station, which I'm director of, we call it the tip of the spear or the tip of the talons. We are the eagles, by the way. So the idea there is if we're on the water doing work, Vester's a really good place to do the outlets there. We have two academic programs that are the Department of Ecology and Environmental Studies. We just switched the names around, so I always have to double check what their names are. And Marine and Earth Sciences. And so through these, we have BA programs, Masters of Arts programs, BS programs, and Masters of Science programs as well. So just to keep it moving along here, I'll just kind of talk about, one thing with the water school we're really interested in is looking at interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary relationships. So we're working with economists, we're working with artists, we're working, of course, with chemists and other natural scientists. We're working with the entrepreneurship program to look at some of these technologies moving forward and do they represent business opportunities. So we're really looking at ways that we can just expand beyond the science and bring in some outside groups. We just hired an environmental psychologist, for example. So, I guess they just go and, maybe talk to a tree or something and say, "Are you happy? You don't look happy." I don't mean that to put them down in that way. Or when you look at statistical data and you get I don't know if you guys know statistics, but you get a p-value. Is it significant? And so the psychologist will be like, well, what's significant about it? Is it really that significant? Sorry, I tell jokes, but anyway. So this is just kind of showing a Venn diagram style here where we all interface together. So you see the core faculty names within that inner circle. We're actually hiring 15 new faculty right now. Everybody is on a search committee, going to see a lot of talks, going through all the interview processes. So the water school is really growing right now. And part of this relates to what Christina said and what Betty talked about. The state listened in terms of people being really upset and outraged with water quality and these harmful algal blooms. And what the state can do most easily is dedicate funding towards those different initiatives. But it's not just about money. That money has to be used properly, has to produce quality results, so on and so forth. So the initiative that Florida Gulf Coast University pursued was really enhancing this water school. It's our program of distinction within the state, which means that more funding came to the water school. So we're hiring more faculty, we're building up our infrastructure so we can tackle some of these problems better. So in terms of the Department of Marine and Earth Sciences, this focus is really looking at the coast proper and the saltwater end member, if you will, of the watersheds. And so without going into a whole lot of detail here, basically this is where a lot of us are really looking at issues right along the beach, in our estuaries, out in the Gulf of Mexico. And this was basically a big early push of research, especially with a focus on water quality and red tide. This is where we have also our BS programs and our MS program. You can see that we have minors for our undergraduates as well, shown here. Environmental education is a really interesting one that I'm becoming more and more involved in terms of how do we better translate the information that we're generating into not only lesson plans, but also getting that knowledge not only to, let's say, elementary school or middle school, but also continuing education opportunities. So when people come to lectures or come and take classes. And so I think that's a really important program as well. I want to keep my timer on here so I can keep track here. And so just kind of an overview of our different centers and institutes. So the Coastal Watershed Institute I mentioned first. And so this was really, I think this was basically the proto-water school. So the Coastal Watershed Institute was founded back in 2004, and it was early on in FGCU's existence. It was founded in 1997, but by 2004, there was a group of faculty there that really wanted to pursue local research interests, so mainly focusing on the Caloosahatchee River and looking at Estero Bay, San Carlos Bay, up into Charlotte Harbor, so kind of focusing on that area. And so very successful, a lot of funding came in to study these local issues, and that really demonstrated that we had people that could do this type of research, and that increased the funding that eventually led to the water school. The Everglades Wetland Research Park is down at the Naples Botanical Gardens, so Bill Mitch is the current director. We recruited him from Ohio State, where he is a very prominent wetland ecologist scientist. And so a lot of his work is looking at projects directly related to the Everglades, but also in a more applied sense, looking at things like wetland restoration and ecological engineering. So one of his big fortes has been to what degree do wetlands remove nutrients? If we build more wetlands or if we optimize wetlands, can they remove even more nutrients? And so they can clean up the water as the water moves downstream, for example, before it reaches our estuaries. The Vester Field Station, again, I'm director of the Vester Field Station. It's a facility that's on the water on Little Hickory Island on Bonita Beach. And so basically what's really nice about this center is we're right on the water. We have a lot of boats, a lot of docks. We get students out in canoes. We get them out on the boats. We do a lot of research based out of there. We bring in high school groups. We bring in community groups so they can participate in various activities. So it's a really good venue, if you will, to really do these outreach and engagement type opportunities with our local community. We have various partnerships. We do collaborate with a lot of other groups. And as you know, and as Christina and Betty alluded to, these are very complex problems and they're very widespread. So, you know, it's going to take a lot of different expertise and it's going to take a lot of different people focusing on this to really come up with some viable solutions moving forward. In terms of regional impacts, we again do focus on issues that are of regional concern, so it's not just about the Caloosahatchee River, but extending down into the 10,000 Islands, Naples Bay, up into Charlotte Harbor, up into Tampa Bay. There are economic impacts, both in terms of recruiting our new faculty and recruiting new staff, bringing in more people into the area, trying to expand beyond a tourism-based driven economy, for example, bringing in more technical aspects of it. And our students are getting a lot of opportunities, and so that's a really great thing as well. This is an example of the various companies that our students have had internships with, for example, and many of them have led to jobs as well. So we look at this as a good way to basically feed our students into the local economy. And so looking at some of our initiatives, we have one that we're looking at that we call water security. So it's basically looking at anything from making sure our drinking water is safe to how human well-being is affected by poor water quality. Looking at healthy ecosystems, climate change is a big one, economic opportunities and development. We're trying to look at this, again, using a multidisciplinary approach. So systems thinking is one way of looking at this if you use some of the business jargon. But all of these relate together. So we have to keep in mind that when we focus on one thing, like if we're focused on water quality, it's not simply how many nutrients are in the water, but what is the effect of that, not only on ecosystem health, oyster health, seagrass health, algal blooms, but how does that affect the economy? How does that affect everybody's well-being? As Betty alluded to, 3 years ago, there were a lot of very upset people in this room. So there is the well-being component of it that's really important to address. How do we properly communicate? How do we know, as Betty was talking about with this red tide study that was just conducted, how do we know what the public wants? And how can we meet their needs? How can we explain to the public what we're doing and why it's important, so we're just not talking past each other? So there's other things that we can do here, I think, that we can really expand this bi-directional communication and understanding, bi-directional understanding of what's important, what needs to be done, and what is being done. So looking at some of our strategic initiatives here, climate change is a big one. And so we have the Coastal Resiliency Compact that we're working on. Mike Savarese is leading efforts here. Sea level is rising. That's undoubted. So regardless of what people think about climate change, global warming, the ocean doesn't care. It's rising. And we're going to have to deal with it. And so what are we doing to deal with it? So that's a big initiative. University of Florida is involved in this quite a bit as well, as are other institutions. And we are very close to sea level here. So it is a big problem, especially for southern Florida in general, but southwest Florida as well. So here are some of the questions that we're focusing on in terms of better understanding sea level rise. Sea level has risen up and down many times over the past 100,000, 200,000 years, even going further back. But we can see the marks that it left on the landscape, and that can help us better understand how sea level is affecting our coastlines. And so, can we keep up with sea level rise? For example, one concern is as sea level rises, mangroves are going to be retreating inland. Do they have an area to retreat into? Or are they going to run into a parking lot? Oyster reefs are going to have to build up and move inland. Are they going to be able to do that? So there's really important questions, just looking at the natural side of things, that we need to get a better grasp on so we can prepare. And then also, how can we do it from a societal point of view here? And so making sure that we can prepare our coastal development, not only zoning and building, but should we be building in certain areas? Should we be leaving areas open? How does this affect flooding? How does this affect runoff? So there's a lot of big issues here. Just trying to speed up here, I'm running out of time. We have people focusing on hurricane work. And so one thing about hurricanes is there's a lot of talk about, are they becoming more intense and more frequent? Well, one thing we can do is look at the historical record and the sediment record for past hurricanes. They basically will leave overwash fans up in the estuaries. So you can look at these sediment bandings, if you will, in these sediment cores, and you can look at past hurricane events, how frequently they occurred, how intense they were, and then that'll help us get a better idea of, are we seeing a higher intensity of big hurricane events over time. And that, again, will affect coastal development and coastal resiliency. We're looking at healthy ecosystems in terms of seagrasses, how that's affected by water quality and human activities. We're also looking at really focusing on what the stressors are with seagrasses and oysters. Before we really undertake any restoration, we have to understand what is killing the seagrasses and the oysters to begin with. Because if you just go and do a restoration project and those stressors are still in place, then they're just going to die again. So you really need to understand what the stressors are, and can we do anything about those stressors is the second part of that. So that's where we really are on a lot of this. Looking at dead zones, after the 2018-2019 red tide, we had big areas where there was no oxygen in the water, and it caused a lot of fish mortalities, a lot of blue crab mortalities. We have sensors out there monitoring oxygen levels right now to see if this is going to be a new chronic problem we have to deal with. Harmful algal blooms, of course, is a big one. We have people working on blue-green algae, looking at what are the causes of these blue-green algal blooms, looking at can we do anything to prevent these blooms, and what are the human health impacts of that as well. So there's a lot of work looking at this. We just did a big sampling event in Cape Coral, for example, in terms of these human exposures from the aerosols. Red tide, I'm doing a lot of work with red tide, looking offshore, looking in the deeper waters where the satellites can't see to try to get more information on here that we can feed into these forecasting models. We have people looking at mercury poisoning, for example. I have 12 seconds left, so here we go. So it's not only about tuna. You may have heard about you shouldn't eat too much tuna because there's a lot of mercury in that. So that's another concern that we have there. So that's 15 minutes. So I'm just going to zoom on through. A lot of restoration projects, again, with Bill Mitch here. And so just the last two slides here. These are just a lot of the different buzzwords that come up when we kind of do a word frequency diagram of the work we all are involved in. And so there's a lot of different people involved in this. The water school, the building is officially called Academic Building 9 right now. We're just waiting for a simple gift of $10 million to name it. So it's just the blank water school right now. But the building, we just got our certificate of occupancy, and we're going to start moving in. Furniture's moving in. This is actually sunrise, not sunset for the building. But it's going to be a really great facility, and we're really excited about the future work we'll be doing there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Parsons. We have a few questions to get through before we jump on to session 2. If I may ask the session 2 panelists to please make their way to the check-in table. The staff there will guide you to the stage for the next session. So the questions that we have center around a couple of broad themes. So I'm going to take them and kind of consolidate a few of them into kind of broader, overarching questions, but kind of start by bringing it back around to what a lot of the concerns were, a lot of the crux of the concerns were from the previous Water Quality Summit. Some of the questions revolved around what can we do to avert another disastrous red tide like that of 2018, which is... It's a very broad question, but I was wondering if any of the panelists had any thoughts both on that event and what we've been doing.
You start.
Based on the current available data, as Betty alluded to on this, red tide starts offshore. All the data that we have to date suggests it starts offshore. It's a natural process. It's related to the loop current and the Saharan dust, like Betty said. So as far as we know, we cannot stop red tide from happening. So that leaves two questions. How are we going to deal with it when it comes to shore? And so that's really where we have, any chance of doing something. And so the issues with that, and I'll hand it off to Betty here in a second, and Christina, but the issues with that is it's often way too big by the time we detect it and it moves near shore. And so that just makes it really expensive to try to deal with. So I think when you look at some of the different mitigation strategies that are being done, anything from using something like reactive oxygen species, ozone or hydrogen peroxide, for example, using clay flocculation to basically sink the cells to the bottom. I think all of these would have a use on a very strategic basis once we understand what the other environmental impacts of it are. But otherwise, I think there's a lot of education and almost like a hurricane response plan. We can't stop a hurricane, but we can probably better prepare for a hurricane if we think about it, and we could better prepare for red tides if we prepare or think about it more, I think.
Well, Mike, you just pretty much stole my thunder right there. Yeah, I mean, I think Mike is right. We don't have any strategies right now to be able to minimize or not, because red tide is a naturally occurring organism. It's been out there for, hundreds of thousands of years. At this point, the best thing that we can do is make sure that we know where the information sources are so that we can protect ourselves as that red tide moves on shore and moves into those coastal ranges. There are some efforts, for instance, in 2018, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection made funding available to local governments to remove fish kills from the water. Historically, we've thought of fish kills as being something that's just kind of, it looks bad as they're floating around in the water and coming up on the beaches. But in recent years, we've learned that these can carry a lot of nutrients, and as they decompose, those nutrients are being released back into the water and fueling more red tide. So these are kind of small mitigation strategies that we can do right now. And that process is now in place through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, which has to suspend the fishing regulations for those regulated species to be able to pull those dead fish out of the water. And again, some of the forecasting things that I mentioned are important today, or maybe important as we develop these mitigation strategies. It's not going to be that, that one tool that is our panacea. It's going to take a lot of tools, but the time to really address a bloom is not, like if you think about it like a forest fire, the time to put out a forest fire is not when it's burning a million acres. It's when that fire first starts to kindle. And so we need the technologies to know, to be able to predict that we might have a severe bloom, the technologies to be able to recognize that we do have a bloom, and where those blooms are headed, and then we need that suite of tools to be able to address it. We're not at that last point yet, but we're making steps in the right direction.
I'm not sure if, now I think it's on. I'm just going to add to the sort of the discussion here. I think that one of the points that I think Betty made really elegantly is that there's a big role of communications in these blooms, and that people are aware of what's happening, they understand how to protect themselves, where they should go to sustain their activities, and also to sustain economic activity in this really important, economic hotbed of our state that is this region. I realize that our work isn't even sort of formally published yet. It comes out in another 2 weeks in an academic journal. But there is a role of land-based nutrients coming off the roll in consistently facilitating red tide. It is not starting red tide, as Mike and Betty mentioned. It's an offshore sort of oceanographic phenomenon. But once the red tide is inshore and in our estuaries, we are finding consistent evidence that land-based sort of nitrogen in particular is sustaining the duration and the severity of these blooms. And so I want to just say that this is something that there are benefits beyond red tide for reducing land-based nutrients. for the overall health of our estuary. So I don't want to make my comments specifically red tide focused. We have work to do, and this is not pointed at any individual industry. It's collective action at the residential level, at the urban level, at agriculture, at a variety of septic to sewer conversions. There's a whole consortium of things that we need to be looking at, and I want to make sure this isn't specifically a red tide statement that I'm making, but collective action to reducing sort of nutrient loading to our coastal systems. The levels of nutrients that are flooding into the Charlotte Harbor estuary are several hundred times higher than they were historically. So I just think that we cannot continue to just, I think that it's going to be hard and really difficult to figure out where those pressure points are. But, and I can't say that, making one change to septic to sewer is going to mitigate red tide. This is as I mentioned, this is a large watershed draining to this particular region of the coast. And even if actions are made here, it doesn't mean that upstream the same actions have been taken. These ocean currents are moving water and sloshing it up and down the coast as a result of those tidal currents. So this is a big statewide sort of challenge, and I look forward to discussion about Miles's paper and some of the other work that'll be coming out of our lab. But anyways, and so I know this is a newer sort of work to be coming on the scene that requires, sustained work. But just want to put my voice into the discussion here.
Thank you very much, all three of you. And actually, Dr. Angelini, what you brought up kind of dovetails into the second broader question that I want to bring up for this panel, and that has to do with beyond red tide. The other, of course, big concern in terms of the ecology of the harbor is the recent documented losses of seagrass, the not quite so recent but ongoing proliferation of macroalgae and macroalgal growth in the harbor. And so there are a number of questions asking what can we do to restore or mitigate that, but I want to fold that into another suite of questions that also ask about how these activities that the different academic institutions and agencies are doing, how they coordinate with one another, to what extent are they coordinating. Before I throw that to you guys, I do want to partially answer that second part, in that during the last year's red tide bloom, we received at the county fairly consistent communication from Kate Hubbard and the Fish and Wildlife, who in concert and coordination with a myriad of other agencies and academic institutions were providing constant updates in terms of where we were seeing red tide or high Carinium brevis concentrations, where we think they might be going next, and a lot of internal discussion to kind of help understand and figure out where the public health and safety concerns may be based on those movements and where they think they may be going. And I can't thank them enough, everybody that's involved in that effort. It is a huge, huge help to the counties to be able to consistently receive that information so that our commissioners know and our staff know if we need to consider doing anything to act to inform the public. So throw that out. And then if you guys have any comments either related to our seagrass, macroalgae blooms, or general coordination efforts beyond what you've already discussed in your presentations.
Sure. Yeah, so first, in regards to communication, there is a lot. There's a lot of communication and coordination at the national level, the state level, and the local level. Later this morning, you're going to be hearing from Corey Anderson, who coordinates the Southwest Ecosystem Restoration Team, the Charlotte Harbor National Estuary Program, which brings a lot of scientists and the public together in a management forum. So there's a lot of opportunities beyond red tide to talk about these types of issues and to kind of develop management plans and strategies to implement those management plans. But you're right. We certainly have a macroalgae issue that's not new. We started seeing macroalgae about 2011, I would say. Increases in the green filamentous algae, and this is the big stuff that you can see, not the stuff that goes under the microscope, as well as the what I call drift algae, what Captain Van here would call rolling moss. This is the red stuff that we tend to see, and we know that this is related to increases in nutrients, and there is some evidence that we have seen increases in nitrogen. Where that's coming from, how it's those pathways through the system, I can't answer that. Charlotte Harbor has always been it was designated as a national estuary program, as a protection estuary program, not a restoration estuary program, because it was thought to be really pristine. And we know now we have issues. So instead of holding the line, we need to reduce those nutrients. But we do think, in some regard, that Charlotte Harbor was probably at kind of a tipping point in terms of nutrients. And one of the things, when we collect water samples, we're looking at what's in the bottle. So we're always looking for, what nutrients are in the bottle. Well, macroalgae can store nutrients in their biomass. And so, we can get caught kind of with our pants down by saying everything looks good because the water sample looks okay, but the reality is it's all in that macroalgae. And if we don't turn the tide, then the macroalgae dies, and now it's all in the water column, which is another concern. So we know that we started having a problem around 2011. We've had some significant events. We had Hurricane Irma that came up to our east that dumped a lot of floodwaters into the estuary. And then right after that, we had that 17-month red tide that dumped a lot of probably nutrients into the estuary. Not directly, because it was for the most part offshore, but we did have a lot of fish kills, sea turtles, those types of things that were coming in with tide. And so is it possible that some of this, this massive event that we've been experiencing, we're calling it a hangover effect, lingering effects from these events? Possibly, and very probable. But that doesn't reduce or remove the part that, we already have a nutrient issue. And if we didn't, then after the 2005 red tide event, which came on the heels of bad hurricane seasons in 2004 and 5, we should have seen the same thing. We did not. So yes, I guess I'm going to leave it at yes, we have a nutrient issue.
Say one more thing about sort of coordination. We wouldn't have data to work with if it wasn't for other organizations collecting data and being on the water. So simply our ability to do great statistics and modeling and all of that is because of a lot of existing infrastructure. So including Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, they're fantastic in doing the hard work. So our state agencies need support, our local entities. It's fantastic that Charlotte County is investing in a water quality monitoring program because information is power, and so these are really great efforts, and we look forward to working with them as well. And I look forward to working with Mike and understanding what data sets that FGCU may have to be put to work. So I think both on the sort of understanding of the system as well as the application, and then finally the communication. No single entity can do it alone. It really is collective action. So.
Thank you, and I think we'll end it there for session one. Everybody, please give a round of applause for our fantastic panelists for session one. Thank you all very much for attending. We're going to move on to session two, which is going to focus in on the major projects underway by the county to identify and address our water quality impacts to the harbor and beyond, as well as discuss an example of some of the collaborative efforts being conducted between the county and other state and local agencies. So here to help me with moderating this session is our Assistant County Administrator, Claire Job.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. This is certainly something that Brandon's been working very hard at putting together, and we appreciate all of your input. As Brandon said, this session is going to focus around what the county and the agencies are doing now, what we're actually working on now. So you're going to hear from a couple of county employees, and the first one you're going to hear from is Mr. Dave Watson. He's our Interim Director of Utilities. He's a professional engineer with over 36 years of experience in planning and design public infrastructure projects and managing utilities and public works departments. He has 19 years of experience in engineering, design, and project management with an emphasis on utilities infrastructure in the private sector, and 17 years of experience with utilities and public works in the public sector. He's actually going to tag team with a remote presentation, so we'll see how that works, from Dr. Matt Reeves, who is with Western Michigan University. He specializes in fluid flow, heat, and contaminant transportation investigations in hydraulic systems. His research has been applied to various problems, including climate change impacts on water resources, environmental fate and transportation of traditional and emerging contaminants, geological waste disposal, geothermal energy, and surface water. He directs Western Michigan's 6-week field intensive hydrology field course and was recently awarded the Western Michigan University Presidential Innovation Professorship. Our next presentation is going to come from somebody who needs really not much introduction, and that's Brandon. We didn't feel it was going to be right for him to moderate the session as well as present at the session. So Brandon's going to tell you a little bit about what the county's doing with their water quality program. Brandon's been with us for about a year. It seems like it's been a lot longer, and we wouldn't let him go anywhere else. I can see him nodding his head there. But prior to coming to us, Brandon was actually the nutrient source control and water quality monitoring programs for the Southwest Florida Water Management District. And prior to that, he spent 11 years with the water quality monitoring section of Georgia's Environmental Protection Division. And our final presenter for this session is going to be Corey Anderson from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Corey is an aquatic habitat conservation and restoration biologist with Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. He plans, manages, and monitors fish and wildlife habitat restoration projects in Southwest Florida. He has previous experience with water quality monitoring in Florida and aquatic conservation in the southeast and western US. He holds a BS in Fisheries Biology from California State Polytechnic University and an MS of Coastal Science from the University of Southern Mississippi. You'll find Corey's presentation is amazing, and he's going to really show you something that I'm sure not many of you know about in this area. So I'm going to hand it over firstly to Dave, who's going to talk about the water quality enhancement projects and continued research on on-site treatment and disposal system impacts in Charlotte County, and he will tag team with Dr. Reeves. Dave.
Good morning. I want to thank Brandon and the county for having utilities as part of this presentation this morning, and I look forward to showing what the utility is doing within Charlotte County for our water quality. If I can figure this out. Okay. Little technical difficulties here. There we go. All right, so this presentation is going to be kind of like a storyline where utilities started out, where we are currently, and where we're hoping to go. So Right now, the utility started out in around 2014 with our first study showing water quality in the Charlotte Harbor area. The first project that we did was actually the East-West Spring Lake project, which totaled about 2,000 connections and was the first septic to sewer program within Charlotte County. The East-West Spring Lake project also introduced a new technology to Charlotte County, which was the vacuum sewer system. Vacuum sewer has been around for quite a while, but it was the first time in Charlotte County that it was used. Vacuum gives an advantage in this particular area. It's shallow, doesn't disturb quite as much with construction, and works well with a high water table. In 2017, as you can see, the sewer master plan was introduced and approved by Charlotte County Commission. It focused on septic to sewer conversion throughout the county and created a number of particular criteria for determining where and when within the county that the sewer master plan would take effect. This slide shows the first 5-year plan as part of the sewer master plan. The red areas with X's are areas that are currently in development or under construction within the sewer master plan. The lower area, the M56 and M55, is the Ackerman Sewer project. There's actually a presentation out on the in the hallway there showing the Ackerman system. The M66 area is the Midway Lakeview area, which is currently under engineering design. And the M72A is El Jobin, which we're just finishing up right now. This is more of an overview showing the entire 15-year planned master plan, showing all the other various areas within the county that have been considered as part of the septic to sewer program. So I talked about first, this is the East-West Spring Lake area. It was divided into multiple stages with a total of about 1,863 units that were connected as part of this project. It was the first septic to sewer program within Charlotte County. The El Jobin project, which is just wrapping up, we're in our last plumbing contract now. That has just shy of 300 connections. It's located just off the Myakka River in 776. Again, in another area that was identified with very high water table and directly adjacent to one of our waterways. And this is the Ackerman Project. It's currently under construction, 1,313 units and divided into multiple stages of construction. It's scheduled for completion probably in late '24. And it's the third project that we're doing as far as our septic to sewer program. Just wanted to touch too on the East-West Spring Lake. We do have continued monitoring of water as part of that project, and the utilities work closely with the University of Western Michigan as far as that monitoring program. This is the Lakeview Midway project, which is currently in initial engineering. That's projected to start construction probably next year in '23. Again, it's going to be about 2,100 units to be connected adjacent to a number of waterways. So that's what we're doing currently. And our future, we're looking to initiate advanced wastewater treatment into our wastewater plants. The Commission authorized this late last year. Our Eastport Water Reclamation Facility and Burnt Store Water Reclamation Facilities are currently under engineering design. They will be incorporating advanced wastewater treatment into them as part of those design and expansions. The Westport Water Reclamation Facility is going into preliminary engineering design and will probably start construction in about 1.5 to 2 years. Eastport and Burnt Store will both anticipate start construction either later this year or early in '23. And the biggest thing with advanced wastewater treatment is the reduction in nutrient loading. The state has a 5531 rule. The 3 and the 1 are the nitrogen and the phosphorus. You can see our current levels at Burnt Store and Eastport, and with the advanced waste treatment, that'll reduce those levels down to 3 for nitrogen and 1 or less for phosphorus, any associated reduction in nutrient loading. And that is the end of my presentation. Dr. Reeves will be on the line here in a second. He is going to be remote from the University of Western Michigan. Dr. Reeves.
Let me share my screen. Can everybody see this? You see, I don't know if everybody can see this or not.
Dr. Reeves, we can see you. Can you hear us?
Okay, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Whenever you are ready.
Okay. Okay, so hopefully you can see this presentation.
Not yet, we can still see you.
Okay, it should be coming up here. Let me try again.
If this doesn't work out.
Can you see this?
Yes. Perfect, thank you.
Thanks. Sorry. Technical difficulties. Okay, I want to thank the summit organizers for inviting me. I would have loved to have joined you in person. Sunny or cloudy Florida right now is better than snowy Michigan. We have quite a bit of snow falling as I speak. So I'm going to talk today about approximately 4 years of research concerning on-site treatment and disposal system or septic impacts in Charlotte County. And as I get going, I want to thank a former graduate student of mine, Tan Bushka, who's now with HDR Consulting, Kimberly Sutter, who is an intern at Charlotte County Utilities, and Ruta Vardes at Charlotte County Utilities for their help and support. And this research, as I mentioned, began approximately 4 years ago in 2017. And this work differed from previous research because there was a distinct focus on septic impacts to groundwater and groundwater canal interaction. We have 2 completed, 1 current project that's ongoing. The 2 that were completed were a sodium bromide, a tracer test. It's non-toxic, it's a salt, to estimate representative velocity of groundwater in non-canal impacted regions. So we used Algal as our field site. And we applied what we learned there to a canal impacted site at the Ackerman Subdivision and performed some nitrogen fate and transport modeling, and also were able to test out some hypotheses. And currently ongoing is Ackerman nutrient modeling in canals and groundwater wells. And that monitoring program was informed by our previous projects, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So as you know, here is Algal, and here's the Ackerman area, a little over 2 miles linear distance between the 2. And when I talk about Ackerman, think about this area of land being between the Myakka and the Peace River, with title signatures coming from, title responses coming from Charlotte Harbor. This is showing my student Tanton. We have a well field here. This is the injection well. We injected the salt tracer, and we monitored concentrations with help of volunteers. Over this transport distance, we were able to look at the subsurface geology, which was predominantly sand overlying clay. And by monitoring these wells, we can see how fast a tracer, in our case, a contaminant, thinking about nitrate, which is conservative in the subsurface, at least being, doesn't stick to things. It moves at the approximate speed of the groundwater. And I want to thank the volunteers and Betty and Andrea for their help for tracer sampling. Our velocity that we think is representative of non-canal impacted sites is around 12 to 15 feet a year. And the non-canal sites represent a more diffuse discharge into the harbor of nitrogen and other nutrients, but it's really nitrogen that we're focusing on here. But we then applied what we learned to a canal impacted site. So this is Ackerman Subdivision, a close-up with all their waterways, and it's actually connected without any weirs or hydraulic control structures to the harbor. There is a tidal response that you can see and physically observe when you're out there. Those of you that live there or have been there know what I'm talking about. And so it represents like an extensive tidally influenced canal network area. The houses were built on sediment dredge from canal systems, so you get a good glimpse in the canal, especially at low tide, on what the subsurface looks like. We also did some subsurface borings as well. And it's a very shallow water table, again, with these that's impacted by tidal fluctuations. So I don't have time to go into a lot of details here, but our work was on nitrogen fade and transport in this canal influenced area. Here's our model domain here. It basically terminates on the north end with Edgewood Boulevard, and the canals themselves are represented. The lower canal network is represented here, and we actually map the canals as highly conductive areas within basically the sand. We also mapped the 5 different areas in terms that Charlotte County Utilities has in terms of the conversion to septic zones, so the 5 zones here, and we had excellent data on applying the fluid fluxes and nitrogen mass associated with each one of these areas. And so this model is supported by a whole host of data on subsurface geology, water levels that we collected while we were there, and septic fluid and nitrogen loading. And most importantly, the model captured the geometry and partial influence of the canal network on the groundwater flow system. So as we look here, this is the model, this is the flow results. We basically inject particles into the model. These are hypothetical coordinates that basically move along with the groundwater flow direction. But what you can see here is the dominance of the canal structures in the flow system, and you can see the flow moving towards the canals and exiting the system, which is what we think is happening in real life. And going back in time, applying a 40-year spin-up period to represent how long the homes have been there and what it might look like with an idealized plume of nitrogen. This is basically what the model produces, and it captures these patterns. You can see that the concentrations are highest actually in the yellow. This is a 20 milligram per liter nitrate. You can see that the nitrogen is actually lower concentration, or the nitrate, along the canals. So we think there's a fast canal transport mechanism that short circuits going through basically the sand all the way and discharging lower down here towards the harbor with the influence of the canals. Now we wanted to know, upon conversion, what would be the timescales associated with improvement of water quality. Essentially, how long does it take this nitrogen to flush out of the system? And on the canal-dominated sites, our estimates are between 2 to 3 years. And we actually have some data from East Spring lakes that support both the concentration distributions and the timescales that we were seeing. For a 50% reduction is 2 to 3 years, and for a 90% reduction, it's around 8 to 10 years. We did have this work peer-reviewed, published in Hydrogeology Journal, which is a strong journal in my field that people could look at if they're interested in looking more into our study. And so this helped us form a conceptualization of this groundwater canal interaction. And essentially, with our conceptualization here is that canals serve as preferential pathways that connect septic effluent, which is discharged from the septic onto the drain field. You have this nitrogen-rich septic effluent. It can discharge into the canal, but it would tend to discharge into the canal when the tidal stage is lower. At lower tide, so the water table is lower than the canal stage, then it would actually be suppressed at higher tide. But what's not captured in our model is that these tides rise and lower throughout the day. So in an approximate 25-hour period, you'd have 2 low tides and 2 high tides. And so you also have this episodic tidal influence that influences groundwater discharge and potentially very rapid transport to the canals. So in 1 to 2 tidal cycles, potentially some of the septic effluent that's discharged in the canals can basically reach it into, basically extend and migrate into the harbor. So we still have more research questions that we'd like to address, and I've been looking into potential funding sources for this. But essentially trying to better understand the mass fluxes of nutrients from canal systems to the harbor and how this fast transport mechanism may contribute to red tides. And what I mean by contribute is not causing red tide, as Dr. Angelini mentioned earlier, but rather we're thinking in terms of the temporal duration and severity. You know, how could they add, or, you know, I hate to use the word enhance, but essentially make worse, as compared to nutrients that are discharged through more diffuse groundwater along the water land interface. So we've used what we've learned to apply our nutrient monitoring program. This is a map here that Kimberly Sutter produced, and what we're doing is we're overlaying this plume map on housing density, or you can think of housing density as a proxy or surrogate for septic density, and where we would want to locate our wells according to this map with the hot spots. So these maps are helped us put in the wells, and the wells are currently installed. We also used our estimates to help estimate impacts for septic to sewer conversion and swell restoration at Ackerman, and what the reductions would look like for nitrogen and phosphorus. And these maps are actually, these wells are currently installed, and data is being collected. I'm not going to present any of the data. It's preliminary at this point, but it'll be helpful to understand between the collection of these monitoring wells and the canal systems. And we're basically sampling at the kind of mouth of the canal, so to speak, looking at the reductions and the interactions with basically the nutrient loading to the harbor. And how we're collecting from these tidally induced canals is, here's a picture of Kimberly using a Van Dorn sampler. It's basically a tube. It has 2 doors, 2 lids that are spring loaded. You send a shuttle down. When you lower it into the approximate depth, send the shuttle down, it'll close. And it's a great way to take the sample at the depth that you want. This is a tidally influenced signature with a mixed tide. And so we took advantage of the tidal stage to look at results that are more representative during the rising limb of the low tide, when those water samples would be more concentrated with groundwater discharge. And here are the nutrients that we're essentially looking for, but basically various speciations of nitrogen, and looking at total phosphorus. And in the canal sites only, we're looking at total suspended sediment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave. So we're going to turn over now to Brandon Moody. He's going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in the county and what his position is doing to help improve water quality in Charlotte County. Go ahead, Brandon.
Good morning, everyone. So as we're getting the presentation queued up, we're going to talk a little bit today about where we are in planning for the water quality monitoring program, which, as we'll talk about in more detail in a little bit, we're still on target to get boots on the ground and start getting samples collected by the time wet season rolls around this year. So what I'd like to do is, oh, hi. There we go. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the draft strategy and talk about some minor adjustments that were made based on feedback that we received from the 3 public information sessions that we held back in January, as well as what you'll view is based off of feedback from multiple agencies that have also reviewed this. So at this point in the game, the request for proposals for the contractor that will be doing this work, that request has been filed and is open until I think the end of March, at which points we'll be undergoing negotiations with the winning contractor, and hopefully we'll have everything ready to rock and roll by May or June, which is ambitious, but that's how I like to do it. So. Just as a reminder, the water quality monitoring strategy was actually described in our county strategic plan, and it's really just a piece of the overall goal of developing and implementing a water quality management plan before the end of 2023. So one thing that you'll hear about more in the near future, once the water quality monitoring program is on the ground and starting to move, is the development of the One Charlotte, One Water plan. Right now we are set to have that implemented before the end of fiscal year 2023, which would be fall of next year. You'll be hearing a lot more about that in the future, much like with the monitoring plan. The public will be engaged fairly regularly to get their opinions, insights, questions, concerns about the components of that management plan. So the difference between the two is the monitoring plan we're doing this year is water quality sampling, what is in the water. The plan is what are we going to do about the impairments that we've identified in the water, not just through our own monitoring, but through what the Department of Environmental Protection has identified as impairments within our county. So the overall goals of the monitoring strategy is, number one, to provide the Department of Environmental Protection with data to assist in their determining the impairment status of waters in Charlotte County, which means that I'm placing an emphasis on collecting data in a manner that environmental protection can utilize as part of their water quality assessments. As a very brief reminder, it is the jurisdiction of the State Department of Environmental Protection to assess waters of the state and determine and verify the presence of impairments. We'll also hope to determine potential sources of pollution contribution to Charlotte Harbor, especially as it relates to nutrient inputs. One topic that has been discussed during past commissioner meetings and public presentations is that there are a number of water bodies in the county that are considered by Department of Environmental Protection to be impaired. For example, much of Charlotte Harbor is verified as impaired for high concentrations of either nitrogen, phosphorus, chlorophyll, or a combination of the 3. So this program is an opportunity for us to start to determine what the sources of those impairments might be. Subsequently, by identifying the potential sources of pollution, we can then hopefully identify potential measures for addressing those sources. And then finally, track long-term trends in water quality. So in other words, we want to try to understand not just what is in our water now, but how that might change over time. So this is a very abbreviated version of some of the presentations that I've given to the commissioners and to the public as part of the public information meetings to kind of set the stage behind the philosophy behind the water quality monitoring program. So I'm just going to briefly touch on these concepts. If you want to know more, there is a site selection strategy document that is available on our One Charlotte, One Water page. That I'll direct you to later on in this presentation, that gives a lot more detail about where we're going, what we're doing, why we're doing it, some of the obstacles that we're running into. And from there hope to generate feedback from the public. So one of the first steps in developing a monitoring strategy is to figure out what already exists in the area, who's already doing sample collection in the area, so that we can determine how our monitoring might complement it. This map shows where ongoing long-term monitoring is being conducted in the county. So, in other words, there are other monitoring efforts in the county that are not shown on here. For example, the Department of Environmental Protection does collect samples in Charlotte County, but not on a long-term basis. They basically identify water bodies that are in need of additional data to help them determine whether or not there's an impairment, and they get just enough data to be able to do so. So in other words, they may visit a particular location 5 or 6 times out of the year for 1 or 2 years, and then that'll be it for the foreseeable future. So what you're seeing here is an accounting of locations that have been sampled regularly, typically monthly, year over year over year. So these are the availability of longer term data sets. One thing this also doesn't show is the monitoring effort by the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership. They actually sample 60 locations throughout Charlotte Harbor every month, but those locations are somewhat randomly selected. The short version is that they've divided the harbor into regions, and within each of those regions, they sample 5 locations per month. I did want to show those because of specific locations, because they're randomly selected, you'd have a giant sea of blue dots all over the harbor. But I do want to point out that there's a lot more monitoring going on in the harbor than just what's shown on this map. So the idea then is to kind of fill in the gaps. And the gaps are primarily, if you go back and look at what's being monitored, a lot of the efforts center around either what's in the harbor or what's along the coastline. There's not a lot of energy devoted to what is coming into the harbor, what is going into the Gulf from land. And so that's where we're kind of coming in with the current version of the monitoring strategy. It's to fill in this gap and capture what is entering those coastal waters. The general idea is to try to sample the furthest downstream point in each of these water bodies so that we can get an idea of what is actually going into the system. And then based on what we find there, if we find, like, for example, one of these locations has extremely high nitrogen, we can conduct source tracking and sample further up in the watershed to see if we can figure out where it might be coming from. It's important to understand that what you're seeing is the first iteration of the monitoring program for the county. The goal here is to start getting samples, start to identify potential areas of concern, review what we've learned, and then make changes as necessary. So this is going to be somewhat of an iterative approach to this program. The other thing I want to touch on is funding for this effort. Now, most of it is coming from the stormwater MSBUs. So as such, monitoring within each of these portions of the county is limited by the funding available within that MSBU. So as an example, $75,000 is available for collecting samples in the area labeled as South County on the screen. Those funds are exclusive to that region. So in other words, I can't take any of that $75,000 and spend it elsewhere. The monitoring must be paid for through that $75,000 and must be kept within that South County region. So beyond the 3 pockets of funding that we have from the stormwater MSBUs, the commissioners have granted an additional $50,000 from the general fund that can be used anywhere within the county. So this could include additional samples or studies, for example, in the harbor or in the tidal rivers. The other thing that I want to make aware is that these funding amounts are not necessarily permanent, that they're based on availability of funds in comparison to other initiatives and priorities that these MSBUs have. So, for example, if one of these MSBUs sees a dramatic increase in needs for stormwater infrastructure, that could potentially have an impact on the funding that we have available. So as I mentioned, the current steps are to start getting boots on the ground, and we're well on our way with that. The bids are starting to come in for the work. We hope to have the actual bid process closed out at the end of this month, negotiations next month, so that we can actually get monitoring going at the beginning of summer, late spring. From there, we'll collect samples for several months to a year, and then conduct a review of what we've learned thus far, and review the actual monitoring program itself, preferably done by an external party. So think of it as kind of an audit. What have we learned so far? What are we doing so far? Do we need to make any changes to our strategy, to our site selection? Do we need to do more intensive monitoring in a particular area based on what we've learned so far? Do we need to downgrade the volume of monitoring in an area based on what we've learned so far? So basically taking lessons that we've learned in that first year and applying it and modifying the plan accordingly. And again, the monitoring plan is just the first in a suite of steps related to water quality protection in the county. We're also working on mechanisms to communicate the data that we collect to the public. So on the One Charlotte, One Water webpage, alongside the site selection strategy document, there's also a link to an interactive map where you can actually click on the proposed monitoring locations. You can learn more about the existing monitoring that's being conducted by other agencies. And the hope is to take that and morph it into a reporting tool as well, so that the public can see what data we've collected and be able to get an idea of what we're learning as we're continuing to sample in the county. Ultimately, this will feed into ongoing development into the One Charlotte, One Water management plan, which again is not just what data we're collecting, what kind of monitoring that we're going to do, what is impaired, but also how we're going to address those impairments, how we, the community, the county, industry, will work together to try to protect and preserve our waterways. Again, stay tuned for a lot more discussion on that coming up in the very near future. So, for the fourth time, all of this information that I discussed is available on the website at the One Charlotte, One Water webpage in the county. Don't have to worry about writing that down. Simply Google One Charlotte, One Water. It will be the first hit in your search results. Please feel free to take a look at the information there. If you have any questions or comments, reach out to me. My contact information is there. Also, you probably, when you came in here, noticed a large map on a poster board. Please take a look at that. That's actually a printed out version of our draft water quality monitoring site locations. There are little sticky arrows that you'll see located alongside the map. What I'm looking to get is a little bit of feedback from you all. So if you don't want to try to corner me and ask me a bunch of questions, but you want to provide some input as to where we should be monitoring, visit that map, take as many of those little arrow stickers that you see and place those arrows on portions of the county that you think we need to be focusing on. Even if there's already a proposed monitoring location there, feel free to put an arrow there, because it helps to me to know that, that there's a lot of interest in knowing what's going on in that particular region. So it's another way for you to voice your thoughts about what we're planning on doing in terms of monitoring in the county. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Brandon. As you can see, we're keeping him very, very busy. I want to move on now to Corey Anderson, who's going to talk about the collaborative juvenile sportfish habitat conservation work that we're doing collectively between Charlotte County and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. So take it up.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning. As they're bringing that up, thank you. I'd like to just thank the organizers of the summit for inviting me. And a big green button on there. So collaborative juvenile sportfish habitat conservation doesn't scream water quality, but it is related, trust me, because fish live in water, and we are looking to make sure that we keep them living in water and healthy and thriving for all of us. And so you've heard a lot about the FWC, or Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, mentioned by some of our earlier speakers. But just for those who aren't familiar with us, we're the state Fish and Wildlife Agency. And our mission is to manage fish and wildlife resources for their long-term well-being and the benefit of people, so that people can enjoy them and utilize them into the future. And we have a lot of functions, including law enforcement, those people out there every day, men and women who put their lives on their line to keep us safe and also protect our natural resources. Hunting and game management regulates hunting and provides our shooting parks and things like that. Also, the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute has been mentioned. They're the ones who are our research scientists. So they do things like marine fisheries research and fisheries independent monitoring here in the harbor. They've also done a lot of the red tide research, which was mentioned earlier. They do game management research and things like that. And they're also sort of the boots on the ground for some of the water quality collection that is done through the CHNEP that Brandon mentioned, and I'm sure will be mentioned in our third session today. I'm with the Division of Habitat and Species Conservation, so we basically manage a lot of wildlife diversity, imperiled species, threatened and endangered things, habitat management, plant management. I get to work on fun projects like this aquatic excavator here where we're restoring mangrove habitat as an example. And then also the marine fisheries management folks, they do the typical rulemaking, harvest regulations for marine fish. And I mention all of these ones on the slide because they're all various groups within FWC who are partners to this project. And I'm going to keep using that partner and collaborative thing going on here because it's really how we get work done by bringing more people into the fold and getting more ideas going. Again, other partner organizations, we're working with Charlotte County on this one, water quality, so Brandon and our community development, planning and zoning sections within the county. And then also the CHNEP, Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership, who will again be speaking to you later. They're really a broad partnership for the region, for water quality, for wildlife, and they bring together elected officials and interested people and scientists to really make sure that we're managing this in a sustainable and smart fashion. Let's talk about the fun thing. So Charlotte Harbor sport fishing. Recreational fishing is incredibly popular. No kidding. A big reason to live here, big reason to visit, big reason to work here. This is why I was drawn to the area. I'm sure this is a reason a lot of people here were drawn to the area. It's also an economic driver for us. So the charter captains who are out there taking you out to catch fish, the people who sell boats to you, the people who sell fishing tackle, they're all supported. It trickles into our local economy. It's incredibly important. So recreational fishing generates about $950 million annually across Southwest Florida. That's an estimate for congressional districts 17 and 19. So that's sort of Sarasota, Charlotte, Lee County areas. And then just focusing down within Charlotte Harbor itself, at least $100 million a year goes into tarpon fishing in Charlotte Harbor, and that number is now 11 years old, so I'm sure that number is even higher now. And as you can see there, catching a gigantic tarpon, catching a snook, those are the things that people come here for. And I highlight those two species for a reason, because sport fishing can basically be any fish you pursue for sport, but we want to think about these two species because they are particularly interesting to this project. So sport fish in the environment. When I say sport fish, like I said, snook, tarpon are the ones I really want to hammer on. These fish, like all fish, rely on water and habitat to live, feed, and grow. And these fish live in mangrove areas, backwater, creeks, ponds. They live within seagrasses, and they need clean water to live. And especially the juveniles are the ones that we want to focus on here because without babies, you don't get adults. And we want to catch adults, right? So we got to make sure that the small ones have the habitat they need to live and grow, especially these sheltered backwater areas, high up in the creeks, these, mosquito-y, mucky, kind of not necessarily pleasant places to hang out, but the fish really need that. And again, these two species are kind of important because preserving the habitat that these species use really can act as an umbrella for preserving the other species that we also enjoy. So our wading birds, our manatees, our sea turtles, things like that that are really important to people. And so I just want to point out, if you've never seen a baby tarpon or a baby snook, that's what that looks like. And that one is all of about 3.5 inches long there. So that's what they look like, and then they grow up into those juveniles, and there's some of my colleagues holding some that are caught right here in Charlotte County. A lot of research has been going on here. So they talked about some research earlier as far as water quality. There's also habitat research going on. So FWC, the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, has been partnering with groups like Bonefish Tarpon Trust and has been looking at habitat going on, habitat restoration that's occurred in the Coral Creek region, in our state parks, in collaboration with the Water Management District and the Florida Park Service. And they're monitoring this juvenile sportfish habitat to look at the effectiveness of restoring habitat and how we can make it more productive and more sustainable. And they're comparing that to other man-made habitats and other natural habitats that these fish are inhabiting. So you can see here on the left is a picture of a habitat restoration project out near Coral Creek, out in Cape Hayes, and then some natural pond habitat that these fish like to inhabit. As I said, they're pretty inaccessible. Those are all mangrove trees, and you can imagine trying to climb through mangrove trees for a 1/4 mile is not easy, carrying nets and a bunch of equipment. And so that's why not a lot of people know about these places. So again, pictures of the crew out there netting up these fish, and these are the things that they're finding out there, you know, smaller than your hand. It looks like a bait minnow or something like that, but that's a baby tarpon. And on the right, that's just a picture of all the other food fish that these things feed on. So your little sheep's head minnows and killifish and things like that. And that's what we're finding in here, is that these restoration projects are being productive, and they are producing some of these sport fish that we really need to hold on so dearly to. But we're also locating these things and realizing they are sort of at the interface with our private lands and our developed lands and some rapidly urbanizing land. So you can see that there's a picture of an overlay of a platted neighborhood, which is rapidly beginning to develop. And so this project is really giving us intimate details on where the habitats are that these fish need and how they function. So when the fish access them, how long they grow in there, when they leave there and join the population of catchable fish. And then it's telling us that they're possibly threatened by things like poor water quality in the future, because, you know, were this neighborhood to be fully built out, you might have some pollution coming from stormwater and things like that. And we want to make sure that if it does become built, that we save these places for clean water and enough habitat left for them, and the right timing of that runoff to connect these habitats. And so for the first time, we've really got this like small scale parcel level habitat information. And we've identified various challenges here. So state fisheries regulators that I work with generally do things like make rules like you can keep so many of this species per day. That traditional rulemaking format kind of has trouble translating to, well, how do we save habitat? Because habitat is often regulated by other entities, so other land management entities and state regulatory agencies like the Department of Environmental Protection. So some of those policies, like I said, are set by local governments as far as land use plans and by the state or water management districts. So we want to make sure that we can conserve those habitats, because those habitats are really key for replenishing our populations of fish after we have events like red tide. Or if you can remember all the way back to 2010, cold kill killed a lot of snook. Well, Charlotte Harbor was able to rebound within a year or two from that cold kill because we had these nursery habitats pumping out new fish into the population, whereas some of our other estuaries, like on the East Coast, don't have that good habitat, and they have struggled to come back even from over a decade ago. So how do we make our fisheries resilient, and thus how do we make our local economy resilient? Well, we're trying to set some goals for that. So we want to preserve those precious wetlands, make sure that sportfish nursery habitat is retained. So we're, Boca Grande Pass is the tarpon capital of the world. That's what people come for huge fishing tournaments for. It's amazing, and we want to be able to retain that. Again, it's an economic driver for the area, and it's incredible fishing going on. We want to adaptively manage the projects that we have for habitat restoration, and we want to be able to locate and create new ones that work well. We want to maximize the fish productivity coming out of that, promote the resilience of the economy and the fishery again, and then build and sustain resource management partnerships. So like I said, FWC wants to work with other groups like the county, which is sort of innovative. We want to work with the CHNEP, work with DEP and water management districts, and interest groups like Bonefish Tarpon Trust and other groups like Moat Marine Lab, who have a stake and represent people who want to hold on to these resources. And again, it's a water quality summit, so there is a water quality component here. So the One Water movement at large really seeks to manage finite water resources for their long-term resilience, to be able to meet community and ecosystem needs. Well, fish and the economy is an ecosystem need, and we want to get that habitat function and quality retained. So we need clean water, but we need it in the right places, at the right times, in the right amounts for the fish, because they have relatively specific needs, is what we're learning. And we want to put that science that we're doing into action as far as making smart decisions for how the county grows, how the region grows, and how we manage those resources going forward. So we're now identifying opportunities to manage the fisheries by working on some of those smart growth policies, like I mentioned, ensuring sustainability of our natural resources, managing uncertainty. So the future is always uncertain, but the more we can learn about what we have and the more research we can apply to decision making, we can kind of hedge our bets and manage uncertainty by building redundancy into the system and building in more habitat and the ability for fisheries to bounce back after unforeseen events. Right now we're developing R&D plans to inform our decision making with science, so that's part of this Restore plan. This Restore logo you're seeing is supported by the Restore Science program through the NOAA program, the federal NOAA program. And we're using a collaborative knowledge co-production process. So that just really means getting everybody with the knowledge in the same room, talking to each other, sharing so that we're making the best decisions. And some of our strategies here are really just research and management, putting together research, the research that's guided by the management questions. So when the managers who have to make decisions don't know something, they need to go to the researchers and say, hey guys, how can we answer this question in the best way that gives me what I need to manage the uncertainty and to make a good, smart decision. We're looking at potential habitat preservation. So Charlotte Harbor is blessed with a lot of preserve lands with the state park around the edges. We've got our county preserves and some private preserves. But we want to make sure that as we face future sea level rise, we know this is happening, we're bound to get up to a foot of sea level rise in the next 30 years based on updated projections. We want to make sure that we can sustain that coastal habitat. That habitat's probably going to move inland where it's able to, and we want to make sure that those lands up above that have the capacity to retain fish habitat, to retain wetlands, to retain the function that gives us the natural resources that we love. And potential habitat enhancement. So habitat enhancement, habitat restoration, kind of the same thing. We want to restore the habitats we have. We want to create new habitat where it makes sense. Just like in Coral Creek, we're able to actually alter old canals that weren't being used for development and turn them into productive fish nursery habitat. So again, pictures of some of the people out working, doing this study, and catching some of the snook and showing the natural habitats that they're in really far out backwater areas, but really what the fishery depends on and what our local economy depends on in a way. So I just want to give a shout out to the funding that's been allocated to this. So 2 grants, one through Charlotte County's Restore program, and that's funding that came all the way back from the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, if you recall. And then also the Restore Science program recently has given us funding for this planning exercise. Here's my contact information. By all means, if you have any questions, please reach out. I'm the principal investigator on this at the moment, and we look forward to working with all of these groups and getting more input on how we can make sure that Charlotte Harbor's fisheries retain their luster. Thanks.
Thank you, Corey. I first heard about this program a few years ago at a presentation and was absolutely fascinated. But I think it really goes to the commitment of our Board of County Commissioners in this community in how much they're investing in our water quality, understanding that, you know, Charlotte Harbour is our greatest resource in this community. It's such an important thing in terms of not only our natural environment, but also our tourism, our economic development. I mean, most people in this room probably moved here because of the water. I know I certainly did. So we do have a lot of questions coming in. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to pick on a couple of the questions that we have. And I think our first one, we'll talk a little bit about testing, but testing of new things that are coming up. So we test around a lot of the same things, but I have a question here about how are we addressing testing for things like pharmaceutical drugs in our water? I think I've stumped them.
Sorry, we're getting our thoughts in line here. Well, I'll put it, I think there's 2 ways to answer this, because I think that there's when I've had questions about this in the past, it's been both in terms of what's the environmental impacts, but also the human health concern. Since our drinking water does come from the surface waters. And Dave may be able to speak more on this, but you know, there is a lot of extensive testing that goes on in the water that is pulled from the piece that is used for drinking water to assure that it's safe. In terms of environmental impacts, for things like pharmaceuticals and whatnot, the initial monitoring strategy, the bulk of the focus is on what I call a core suite of parameters that relate more towards nutrients and physical characteristics. However, the way that the program is being structured and designed and written out allows us the flexibility to be able to look more closely at other factors where we feel that it might be important to do so based on the surrounding land use or activities going on upstream. So, for example, gross alpha radiation is something that comes up quite a bit, especially as it relates to the Peace and Tidal Peace area. We're not at this point planning to collect samples for radiation at every single location all throughout Charlotte County. However, in portions of the Peace Basin where it makes sense, we can add that on. So we're kind of looking at on a case-by-case basis. And similarly with pharmaceuticals, we can approach that. The one thing I would say though is, you know, it makes sense to really only target those areas where we would expect to see a great deal or a significant amount of pharmaceuticals. So waterways coming to us that receive a lot of wastewater discharge, in other words, either significant quantities of septic discharge or direct discharges from wastewater treatment plants, if pharmaceuticals are something that would be a concern, and we would especially talk to folks like Fish and Wildlife about that, because you know, the environmental effects really for things like that would manifest more in, like, say, fish and whatnot. And so we would consult with them and the other agencies to determine whether or not those concerns are manifesting or being observed, and therefore we should do more intensive monitoring in the upland waters to determine where the sources and causes of that might be.
Okay, thank you, Brandon. Our second question that I'd like to ask is a little bit more focused towards Corey, and it's specifically, is the FWCC Juvenile Sportfish Habitat Protection working collaboratively with the Fisheries Independent Monitoring Program?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We are. So they are, just down the hallway from me, in fact, and I'm blessed to have such a great resource. So they are just located off Murdoch Circle, and there's an army of field scientists out there who are monitoring our harbor, monitoring the fisheries and the water quality and other things. So they are linked in completely. In fact, they are the ones who are responsible for the information identifying some of these habitats and sampling these habitats and finding out where the fish are and what their status is as far as presence and absence and health and productivity, and even tracking them to some degree where they move within the habitats and then exit the habitat and join the adult population. So yeah, the FIM, or Fisheries Independent Monitoring Program, is all over this one, and I'm very thankful for them, having them help out with this.
Thank you, Corey. And before I move on to my final question, can I ask the session 3 speakers to please make your way to the check-in desk, and so you can come back here and speak in the next session. My final question is around water quality monitoring and water quality in general and the weather. How does things like a La Nina or El Nino event, which obviously we watch very, very closely in terms of our hurricane season, how does that impact water quality in the area?
I would say the most immediate impact, especially like what we're dealing with right now, supposedly is a La Nina event, which means that we're expecting to see dry weather for the foreseeable future. What tends to happen then is the longer we go without rain, the longer we go before the wet season really kicks in, the more buildup of material and stuff that we have in the surrounding landscape. And so when the rains finally do come, you'll hear the talk a lot in water quality and ecological services about first flush. First flush events, when, especially down here where we have very distinct wet and dry seasons in South Florida, when those first pulses of rain start coming through, there's a lot of buildup of material in the landscape that gets flushed out and sent into the system. And so depending on what the activities are in that upland area, you can have a large input of nutrients and other matter entering the system at one time. So you can almost, depending on the volume, you can shock parts of the system with the volume of nutrients coming in. Now, La Nina basically delaying the onset of the wet season and delaying that first flush, you're basically allowing for more buildup of material. And so you may have a larger volume of flush that comes out when the rain finally does occur. That's why something that I mentioned in the presentations, how we're trying to get boots on the ground before wet season, get the boots on the ground before wet season, because it's very important to try to capture that first flush as much as possible. So, our goal right now with the monitoring strategy is to, as quickly as possible, get through the contract process so that we have sampling occurring by the time the wet season's kicking in and we see that flush.
Thank you, Brandon. So just very quickly before I hand over to session 3, and I pass this mic back to Brandon so he can moderate, I just wanted to touch on a couple of questions that we've had in the room and coming in online around mining and things like that in the area, particularly asking, is it time to consider banning phosphate mining in the delicate environment of Florida, and around concern about DeSoto. I don't believe that the panelists up here today are the right people to answer those questions. We certainly have all of our elected officials in the room, and I want to assure everybody out there that our elected officials are very, very cognizant of the issues, of your concerns, and of the opinion of the public in the county, and keep a very, very close eye on what's going on in terms of phosphate mining in the area. So I really didn't want to let those questions go by, even though I don't have a specific person to answer them. I wanted to make sure that you are heard, and we will try and get you additional information and additional answers after the session. So once again, thank you everybody in session 2 for sharing a little bit, just a little bit, about what the county's doing in terms of water quality monitoring. And we will go ahead and hand over back to Brandon, who can talk about what you can do, how you can help, and how you can help make Charlotte County an even more wonderful place. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you all. And to me, this last session is kind of a where the rubber meets the road portion of the program, because what you've heard so far is what we're doing to learn and better understand water quality and ecology of the harbor and the waters in our neck of the woods. What the county is trying to do to address potential water quality issues, but as was mentioned in previous sessions, it's really about all of the different groups working together. It's about the county, it's about commercial industrial, it's about development, construction, and the public, you all, and what you all can do to do your part to protect and preserve our waterways. So to lead that discussion, we have 3 fantastic presenters: Mindy Brown with the Charlotte Harbor Aquatic Preserves, Don Rainey with the University of Florida IFAS, and Jennifer Hecker and Nicole Idavia with the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership. So a little bit about these guys. Don Rainey is a regional specialized agent who provides training and program support to cities and counties in implementing water protection, education, and awareness programs to address urban water quality and conservation efforts. So his audience includes you, the general public, the professional landscape maintenance industry, sports field managers, builders and developers, pest control operators, and government leaders and staff. Mindy with the Charlotte Harbor Aquatic Preserves, which is actually a part of the Department of Environmental Protection, is based out of Punta Gorda. She started there in 2004 as a volunteer water quality monitoring program coordinator, and is currently the manager of the Aquatic Preserves, overseeing multiple monitoring programs and projects throughout the 5 aquatic preserves. She has a degree from the University of Buffalo and continues to learn from the various partners who help protect and restore our local estuaries. Last but certainly not least, Jennifer Hecker and Nicole Idavia with the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership. Jennifer has been working to bring together, Jennifer is the executive director of CHNEP and has been working to bring together diverse stakeholders in local, state, and federal governments to restore and protect water and wildlife habitat in our area, as well as Central and Southwest Florida. She presently serves as a Science Advisory Committee member on the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Task Force and is the chair of the Environmental Advisory Committee for the Southwest Florida Water Management District. So prior to joining CHNEP, she was the Director of Natural Resource Policy for the Conservancy of Southwest Florida for approximately 13 years, and is an environmental scientist working for government and private sectors. Nicole Idavia currently serves as the Research and Outreach Manager of the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership and oversees CHNEP's work in science communications, public outreach and engagement, as well as research and restoration project management on projects that restore and protect water resources and habitats in Central and Southwest Florida. She has a background in research science, environmental communication and policy, water quality and fisheries monitoring, as well as stormwater management. So thank you all, 4 of you, for being here today. And we're going to start with Mr. Rainey. So he's going to bring it up. Is the forward? Yeah, forward.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Charlotte County staff, as well as inviting me here today to provide you a brief overview of what we're doing and providing across the state and individually in the counties, all 67 counties. And actually, I'm a Charlotte County citizen too, and it's great to see all the interest out here in water quality. I've been here since 2004. Generally work out of my car and seen a lot of the state, a lot of changes going on. But the education that we do provide here, as you've seen earlier today, addresses that. So I'm kind of glad we're at the end here where we can make the full circle as to how we will approach and continue to approach protecting water resources. So just a quick overview of what I'm here today to present is, many of you, when we introduce ourselves, you have IFAS, and a lot of you question, what is IFAS? So I want to clear that up. And also then I want to look at the educational and outreach programs that we're offering to educate the public. IFAS is a large division, or actually multiple divisions. We have extension, teaching, and research. And with that, IFAS is the Institute of Food and Agricultural Science. And it's based out of Gainesville, Florida, but yet we are across the state. We provide education primarily toward ag, natural resources, family consumer science, and 4-H and youth. How many of you are master gardeners or master naturalists here today? Okay, so many of you already know our mission and how we use citizens within the counties and cities to educate. Like I said, we're across 67 counties, these 67 counties in the state. We have research and education centers all along our districts and our areas. And again, we have our extension offices in the county. I'd like to recognize Ralph Mitchell over there as your extension county director. Ralph has been here for many, many years, and he is definitely a point person to go to with any follow-up information that you may, or questions you may have today. So UF-IFAS extension is definitely a broad network. We're not only broad within our convention of colleges and schools, but we're state, national, and international. So we do have access, and that's kind of the uniqueness of it, is that you can approach us and ask us for information that we may not have, but we may have to go out of state or even international to get that for you, but we can. We have that type of access within our communities. So let's get to this situation and the reasons why we need the education. Well, one, shortly after World War II, a lot of development went on in Florida, and it's still going on today. And you can see this is what we call land use changes. It's changed from the current state it was in into another, well, here, a more productive state, so to speak, with housing and development. That's continued, and we've, over time, built a lot of density, high-density areas. And one of the things I want you to kind of keep in mind here as we go forward, just think about the rooftops, the asphalt, the sidewalks, and the interconnectedness that we have to our local water systems. Here, it's out the back door. But for some, it may be a little ways. But keep that in mind as we move forward, that we're all interconnected with masses, either surface or groundwater. We're connected here in Florida with it. One of the major mechanisms of moving nutrients or dry particulate that lands on our asphalts, our streets, or driveways, and impervious surfaces is stormwater. A lot of times we don't see what's in it. It could be clear like this, but it definitely has constituents in it that could be containing nutrients and other particulate matter. That we also have larger, and then if it continues, we could upset the balance, so to speak, have eutrophic conditions from too many nutrients from where that water ends up. As research has gone on, a couple of things, well, recently, 2018, we've basically using stable isotopes have been able to kind of identify some of these sources of nitrogen and other nutrients within our water systems. And then we're looking at here a profile of our urban watershed. We talked about earlier our natural watersheds. Well, we do have these micro situations within our urban watersheds that also contribute nutrients, and a lot of times they're much more concentrated and potent. But as you can see, I'm not going to teach you the slide today, but there are the number one there is atmospheric deposition. We have dry and wet deposition coming from our atmosphere during rainfall events. So right now we're in the dry season, not a big deal, but all that particulate is collecting on our impervious surfaces, our rooftops, our driveways and such. And when we get this first flush, we're going to have a lot of nutrients coming down. So we try to educate our citizens. We have to keep these impervious surfaces, especially before the wet season occurs, clean and free of all this debris. And I'll describe how we do that. But moving on, we definitely pet waste as we are growing. I'm seeing a lot more pets on this side of the road being walked up and down. And so we do have pet waste. We have, of course, our number 5 there, our landscape maintenance. And as we move through, you can see our septic, which we've spoke about earlier today. So one of the ways, just using the cartoon here, that we get our literature out and just describing, especially those new coming to Florida, we have to maintain these impervious surfaces in our, mind what goes down the storm drain. So it's important that we educate this, and this is one of our outreach here. There are a number of state programs that we provide across the state of Florida to address water quality, water conservation, and two of them I wanted to mention today is the Green Industry's Best Management Practices Program. This is the manual on the left, and the Florida Yards and Neighborhoods Program on the right. These two programs have been out pretty much well over 12, 15 years now, and again, these are available through our extension outreach locally through our office. But for the Green Industry's Best Management Practices, I actually was the coordinator starting in 2009. And we built this program to address those who are out there blow, mowing, and going, and also if they're licensed applying fertilizer product. But we wanted them to make sure that they're doing it appropriately. If they're going to apply fertilizer, they need to do it appropriately. If they're going to manage irrigation systems, they need to do it appropriately. So this program directed a 6-hour program that they would come into, and then there's continuing education after that. All of our statewide water quality programs basically have 4 objectives, and that's to maintain or look at how we're reducing runoff. We have to reduce runoff, transportation of sediment, and how it influences also our groundwater. We're looking too at the right plant, right place. If we can get our landscapes designed where they're using appropriate plants to begin with, then once established, they have minimum requirements. Mostly keep them mulched, water them during severe drought. Probably, depending on blooming, you may want to add some nutrients right before blooming so that they have that nice blooming color. Otherwise, they're going to do fine just as themselves in your landscape. We're looking again at appropriate fertilization and irrigation applications. Irrigation is one of the mechanisms that will create runoff in landscapes and move those nutrients off site if not properly applied. And to use chemicals wisely. In the late 50s, a program came out, a concept actually called integrated pest management. And that's a way to first look at your cultural practices. First look at the plant. Should that plant even be there before you apply chemical? Maybe get another plant that doesn't have that type of stressors from pests. But anyway, it's a step process as to trying to eliminate the need for chemicals in our environment as the first weapon of choice, so to speak. But to look at what we're doing, first of all. There's 2 behavior changes that I want to give you examples of. What we're looking at in our programs is one, we have to, again, I've preached this, I hate to sound as though I'm preaching to you, but definitely leaving particulate on the driveway, and this is fertilizer pails, is a no-no. We can't allow that anymore. We have to educate our neighbors, our citizens, our communities, and also our professionals, that while they're cleaning up, handling, and maintaining and spreading fertilizer, they can either put the product back onto the turf, put it into the carrier there and use it again, but the sweeping or blowing of pails is important. This is another one. This is something that I see all the time from homeowners, and I guess this is just the cultural aspect of, let's blow the clippings into the street, then they'll dry, then they'll move away, and then I don't have to worry about them on my lawn causing thatch. Thatch is not associated with grass clippings. That's a different process and something I can talk to you later on. But what we're trying to do is the understanding that the grass clippings here contain nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, and it's usable nutrients. It can be recycled. So if we can get those back onto our turf and not bag, we don't want to clog up our landfills any more than they are. It can be useful back to the plant and also reduce our fertilizer applications. So what do citizens need to know? I'm going to show you 9 principles real quickly here that citizens can start doing back at their home. And the first one is right plant, right place. If you're looking at redesigning or retrofitting your landscape, we have a booklet that you can download at our website that will show you a selection of plants and how adaptable they can be to your landscape. So you can start right there, right plant, right place. You can start by analyzing, if you have an irrigation system, analyze it. How often do you set the programmer? Do you set it seasonally? Do you make sure that it's applying on the landscape, not on impervious surfaces? Deflector shields. Deflector shields, not only for professionals here in Charlotte County and otherwise it's mandated if you're going to be applying product. And the reason why is we want to direct the pails from the impervious surfaces and also away from water bodies. Applying mulch, this is probably one of the greatest things you can do as far as after establishing the plant. Make sure that the mulch stays around 2 to 3 inches in depth after settling. This will provide not only weed resistance, but also moisture retainment and capabilities of sustaining the plant much longer. As you know, that with landscape, with land use changes, we do have destruction of habitat, and so we do have to be mindful of our wildlife and create those habitats for them. This again is just bringing up that the homeowner themselves can start practicing IPM. Recycling yard waste, again, we need to reduce the amount that's going into our landfills, that are stuffed in the trash and deposited into our landfills. So definitely recycling on site is important. That's a program within itself. This one here is definitely coming on board now in communities. It's part of the LID concept, but this is called green infrastructure. And this is using the plants themselves to mitigate the stormwater runoff before it goes into the next larger body. And this is going back to the fisheries. This is definitely one way to practice protection. Another way to protect the waterfront so that you don't have that erosion, that wind erosion, or the erosion that comes about from the trimmer, the guy with the weed eater mowing too close to the banks, is to install low maintenance zones or no maintenance zones. I know that there's some ideas too. Oh, that's going to keep the critters too close to my backyard. Well, again, right plant, right place, but definitely we want to protect these waterfronts because there's habitat right there in the littoral zone that's important. Like I said, we have literature, the plant selection guides on the left. This is all electronic now, or you can go to see Ralph Mitchell. He may have a copy or two, or at least he can get you one mailed to you for pickup. The other one here is the adopting the friendly, Florida-friendly landscape, which can be retrofitted into communities. Now, we could not do that. Now the law's passed that we can go back in, and this pamphlet here would give you direction on how to do that appropriately. Again, my name is Don Rainey. I'll be around for any questions or afterwards, and also Ralph Mitchell over there can handle some later on too as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rainey. Next up, I'm going to invite Mindy Brown up to talk about the Charlotte Harbor Aquatic Preserves and the Volunteer Water Quality Monitoring Network.
Alrighty, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Melinda Brown with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection at the Charlotte Harbor Aquatic Preserves. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what aquatic preserves are and where they are, and then focus in on this big, long acronym, Charlotte Harbor Estuaries Volunteer Water Quality Monitoring Network Program. And I'll be calling it Chevy Walkman for short, but there will be a quiz at the end to see if you guys remember what that stands for. Just kidding. All right, so in the state of Florida, the DEP has an Office of Resilience and Coastal Protection, and they manage some of these preserved water bodies across the state of Florida, including the Coral Reef Conservation Program in the southeast. There are 3 national estuarine research reserves in the state of Florida, and then under this umbrella are the aquatic preserves. So as you can tell by this map, there are 42 aquatic preserves dotted along much of Florida's coastline, including 2 freshwater aquatic preserves in northern Florida. And most of these aquatic preserves were designated in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, with the most recent one being in 2020, which isn't represented on this map, but there's an area between Tampa and Big Bend, and that's the new Nature Coast Aquatic Preserve. So again, this is about 4 million acres of especially protected waters throughout the state of Florida. So focusing in on our area in Southwest Florida, we manage the Charlotte Harbor Aquatic Preserves, which are a collective 5 different estuaries managed out of our office right here in Punta Gorda. And they include Lemon Bay, Cape Hayes, Gaspereau Sound, Charlotte Harbor, Pine Island Sound, and Matlacha Pass. And this accounts for almost 180,000 acres of submerged lands and waters. And again, in 1975, there was the Aquatic Preserve Act to preserve these waters by the legislation in their natural essentially natural conditions for future generations to enjoy. And I think that's a really important part, is that we want to preserve these waters, just not for now, but so that our future generations can enjoy these as we have. All right, so how do we manage 180,000 acres and an even larger watershed? So we have an approved management plan that outlines local and regional issues, and we have goals and strategies to address those. But of course, we have to rely on many partners, many of which you've heard today that are in this room, along with local citizens who are a really important part of this monitoring program that I'm going to be talking about today. So all of these pictures represent our long-term monitoring and resource management activities that we conduct. So the upper left picture, we conduct seagrass monitoring throughout 5 aquatic preserves at 50 sites each year. And this provides good information on what seagrass species are growing and how abundant they are. And then we can kind of compare them to some of the water quality information that we have through our continuous water quality program, where we deploy instruments in the water for a month at a time. And we're getting water quality every 15 minutes out of these instruments. So we have 3 stations in Matlacha Pass down in Lee County, and we're trying to expand up into Charlotte Harbor as well. We have a station that we put in last year on the west side of Charlotte Harbor, and we're looking to expand to the eastern side as well. So we also have the Volunteer Water Quality Monitoring Network I'll get into more details about. We also monitor for colonial wading and diving birds. We conduct site inspections for permitting activities within the aquatic preserves. We do education outreach, and we also keep an eye out for invasive species like the green mussel or even the lionfish. And we work with various partners on different projects as well, which keeps us busy. All right, so the Chevy Walkman program. Here's a map of all of the locations that we train volunteers as citizen scientists, and they go out to their designated site once a month at sunrise to collect 19 different field and lab parameters. So through this effort, we have a snapshot look of water quality across 6 aquatic preserves and in 3 different counties. So if you see on this map here, it includes Estero Bay Aquatic Preserve down by Fort Myers Beach, so we coordinate with that office as well to collect water quality information. And each of these sites were chosen to represent the specific water body back in 1998. So we have a lot of long-term water quality data. And some of these sites are publicly accessible at fishing piers and boat ramps, but we do have volunteers that go out on their own boat in Pine Island Sound and Matlacha Pass specifically to collect water quality conditions. I'll get into the quality assurance part of this program, which makes this program pretty unique, and then talk about how we manage the data and make it available. All right, so this program actually started in 1996 up in Lemon Bay area through a program called 3 Creeks Watch. There were some citizens who were interested in what the water quality was looking like in these tributaries going out to Lemon Bay. We took this program over and expanded it in 1998 to all of the 46 sites we have today. And there was a real lack of background water quality data in our estuaries at the time. So this program has been instrumental in collecting background water quality information so that now we can see trends over time. And of course, we make this data available to anybody who's interested. Our partners can use it for various research methods or their projects. It's one of the main important uses that I want to stress today, that it's used for regulatory purposes. Because we have such a strict quality assurance plan, this data can be uploaded into the state's database. And from there, the other arm of DEP that Brandon mentioned before, the state can run an impairment assessment. So what are the water bodies looking like and where are they currently impaired? So that's a really important use of this volunteer data. And in order for that data to be used that way, we really have to train our volunteers on standard methods that follow DEP protocols, and also some what we call verification and calibration of the instruments that we give them. Of course, I want to mention too that having our volunteers be a part of this program, they become stewards of the aquatic preserves. They understand what the water quality is in their own backyard. They can help generate an awareness and help educate others about aquatic preserves and water quality issues. All right, so getting into the details, These are the critical water quality parameters that the volunteers measure at their site once a month. It involves 19 different parameters. And some of these were already mentioned today, but water clarity is really important. It's how far down you can see into the water. And this is important because seagrass living on the bottom need that light to reach through so that it can photosynthesize. So the clearer the water, that's generally going to be better for different habitats like seagrass. So they do this by measuring the total depth with that black and white, what we call a Secchi disc. They lower that down onto a rope, and they can measure the clarity versus total depth. So if it's all the way at the bottom, that is generally really great, and we can get those kind of conditions right now in the early springtime. They measure different weather and water conditions, including tide stage, because that can influence what the water quality is going to be at that site on that particular day, and it's really important to note that. They measure the water temperature and dissolved oxygen, which is of course important for the various marine life in those waters. They measure pH, salinity, and conductivity. So salinity, can change from season to season. In Florida, we have rainy and dry season. And then the salinity at that site can change from day to day and, of course, month to month. So those are all the parameters that are collected with their instrument that we give them. And then they also have a set of bottles that they collect for those other parameters on the right-hand side for chlorophyll, color, turbidity, nitrogen, phosphorus, and bacteria. And those samples are overnighted to our DEP lab up in Tallahassee. The bacteria samples are analyzed locally in Fort Myers because they have a shorter holding time. But we have these great partnerships with labs in order to get those lab bottles analyzed properly. Okay, and like I said before, quality assurance is a big part of this program, and we spend a lot of time on this. The volunteers have standard data sheets and protocols that they follow. The sampling protocols meet DEP's standards so that we can upload this data into that statewide database like I talked about before. The instruments that they given, they have to calibrate it and document it properly. So it's kind of like, if you're going to get on a scale and weigh yourself, you can't have it start at 15 pounds, right? Because you know that the weight that you're going to measure is going to be off. So it's kind of like that. We give them the instruments and they put it in different standards so that they know it's reading properly before they put it into the estuary and record all of the results. So it's a big process of calibrating. They take it out of the water and then they verify, is the instrument still reading? So it's a big, long process, but I assure you that it's pretty easy to learn if anybody is interested in becoming a volunteer. We provide one-on-one training, and we also have a regional quality assurance session where we get all the volunteers together by each of the different regions to make sure that the instruments are working properly, to make sure that the data is collected in the same method. That's part of our QA plan that was approved by DEP. All right, and the most important thing too is how are we using this data and how are we sharing it with others? So again, this WIN database is the Watershed Information Network. That's the state's database where they can assess the state's water bodies and see if there are potentially any impaired water bodies. So if a water body is impaired, it means it's not meeting its designated use. And so by saying a water body is impaired, you can then get the local stakeholders, counties, cities, states, to work together to try to figure out why and where the potential sources could be from. This data is always available by request. You can contact me or anybody at our office. And we also have it up at the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnerships Water Atlas. So if you just Google this long acronym or Volunteer Water Quality Water Atlas, you should come up with this website. And the link is there up there too. So this is a great way for the public to go on. You can learn more about our program. You can click on the individual site or water body that you're interested in, select the water quality parameters, and it can download the data or it can graph it. And that's an example here up there of dissolved oxygen. And then we also have our data uploaded to a statewide assessment of resources called CCAR. And if you ever go on that website, it's the statewide. You can look at different water quality programs, seagrasses, oysters. It's a statewide initiative that all of our monitoring data is available on as well. All right, so we want to keep our volunteers, so we have to do some recruiting, but we also want to retain these volunteers once we have these. We have some volunteers that have been with this program since 1998, and that's really great because we need that long-term consistency when sampling at each of these sites. And we take anybody who's interested. We've had a wide variety of people who are artists, teachers, chemists. We've had a musician who used to play for Janis Joplin, a rocket science person, engineer who used to work for NASA. It's just amazing the type of people that are here and want to help out with water quality monitoring. Yeah, and as I said before, we provide all of the training, we provide all of the gear, and I have some brochures out there if you would like to grab one and contact me later. But we also do fun stuff too. We have t-shirts. I saw somebody in the audience earlier that had one of our t-shirts on, and we try to get together and do something fun. We've had picnics and stuff like that. Okay, I thought I had a different slide in here, but if you aren't able to participate in this volunteer water quality monitoring program, there are many ways that you can help assist the aquatic preserves in protecting them. Don mentioned many beneficial things that you could do, including limiting fertilizer use. There's fertilizer bans certain times of the year. So if you can limit the amount of nutrients coming into the aquatic preserves, that is always very essential. You can plant native plants, get involved with local groups and organizations, and becoming a part of this program, you really get your hands wet, so to say, in collecting some of the data and having a better understanding of water quality in your own backyard. And yeah, that's all I have today. And I want to thank all of our partners who are listed up there, and of course the many volunteers who have made this program possible over 20 years. Thank you. Oh, there it is. I'll leave that slide up.
Thank you very, very much, Ms. Brown. We're going to close out our presentations for today with the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership to talk about working together to protect our water, our wildlife, and our future. Thank you guys very much for being here. Yes, we will have a Q&A session at the end, just like we did with the other two.
Well, first, thank you all for staying to the very last presentation of the very last session. We really appreciate your interest in this issue. We are here to just share information with you about how we're working together to protect water, wildlife, and our future. And we want to thank you and the host today, Charlotte County, who is an active member and supporter of the CHNEP. I'm going to start with giving a brief overview on the background and the work of NEPs for those who are not familiar with us, as well as how powerful partnerships can be in meeting mutual goals for achieving water quality improvement and habitat protection and restoration goals. Afterward, my colleague Nicole will be giving a brief overview of some of the technical projects we're currently working on in the community, as well as ways that you can get involved in helping to advance the efforts. So first, a little bit about who we are. I think you've heard us mentioned over and over. We originally were called the Charlotte Harbor National Estuary Program when we were formed back in 1995. The governor had asked Congress to designate these estuaries in Southwest Florida as estuaries of national significance. And so we actually cover multiple estuaries. We are now renamed the Coastal and Heartland National Estuary Partnership to reflect that we have 6 inland communities, counties, and we also have 4 coastal counties and multiple estuaries again that we are working on, including our namesake, Charlotte Harbor. These estuaries from Venice to Bonita Springs, Florida, are of exceptional quality, and as was mentioned, Charlotte Harbor was really unique in the National Estuary Program because it was in such good condition when it was originally designated that it was designated as a protective status rather than a restorative status. We'll talk about where we are now and where we see some needs to now restore Charlotte Harbor. We're one of 4 national estuary programs in Florida and one of 28 throughout the United States. And as a result of being part of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's National Estuary Program, we do receive special funding from Congress under the Clean Water Act to protect and restore water resources in this area. So first and foremost, the CHNEP is grassroots and citizen supported. We are community driven, meaning that we work with the public to further protection and restoration of our estuaries. We have an advisory board made up entirely of volunteers who represent the public. They're called our Citizens Advisory Board. We have a large team of volunteers who help us with education, research, and restoration projects. And then here represents the power of partnership. We are a public-private partnership that represents all levels of government, local, state, and federal, as well as non-governmental organizations and businesses. We are consensus-based, non-regulatory, science-based, citizen-supported, and we use a regional holistic approach to addressing, protecting water and wildlife in our region. As a result of our ability to have donations, in-kind services, and volunteer services, we're able to achieve $19 worth of restoration for every federal dollar we receive. And again, these are just some of the members of our various committees, but we also partner heavily with universities like you've heard here today, including University of South Florida, UF, and FGCU, who we fund research and work closely on scientific research projects with. And where we work is outlined here in the teal on this map. It's over 5,000 square miles, including the estuaries and the watersheds of Lemon and Don and Roberts Bays in Sarasota County, Charlotte Harbor in Charlotte County, Pine Island Sound, Caloosahatchee, San Carlos Bay, and Estero Bays in Lee County, as well as we cover the major rivers of the Myakka, Peace, Caloosahatchee, and Estero rivers. And what we do is we work on 4 priority actions in our comprehensive conservation and management plan. These include water quality improvement, hydrological restoration, fish, wildlife, and habitat protection, and public engagement. And again, how we do that is through research, restoration, and education, working collectively with all of our partners. We have a very small staff to serve the partnership, of which Nicole and I both are on that team. But the partnership we're just an umbrella organization over the entirety of all the different entities who participate actively in the partnership. So it's about bringing people together, convening, and advancing things of common interest to the partners. Recently, the CHDP contracted economists to complete an in-depth study to determine the economic value of natural resource protection and management in the CHDP area, and they collected and analyzed copious amounts of economic data across multiple sectors to tease out only those that were directly tied to natural resources. And they found that in the CHDP area, our natural resources are generating directly $13.6 billion worth of economic output annually, with $1.49 billion of that economic annual revenue being generated in Charlotte County alone. So CHDP works with numerous partners to collect water quality sampling like you heard earlier, and we can see, among other things, that nutrient pollution, excess nitrogen and phosphorus is becoming a more increasingly problematic issue throughout our entire region. This is because nutrient pollution can also have deleterious effects not just on water quality, but on the growth of aquatic resources like seagrasses, the base of our aquatic food chain. As you can see here in this graphic, basically better water quality leads to seagrass growth, which in turn improves water quality. Inversely, lowering water quality leads to seagrass decline, and in turn further degrades water quality. Nutrient pollution can also contribute, as you heard earlier, to the overabundance of harmful algae. So we have been looking at specifically Charlotte Harbor, and you can see here in this graph, the seagrass acreages over time. You'll note in 2004, when we had some severe hurricanes and whatnot, you do not see a precipitous decline in seagrass growth. In fact, we were seeing annually about 1-2% on average every year increased seagrasses until 2018, when you do see that last bar in the bar chart there precipitously declining, with over 30% decline in that 2-year period. We also are seeing a growing overabundance of macroalgae, so we have reasons to be concerned. If you pick up one of our free nature calendars out there on the table, you can actually see in the educational inserts maps of exactly where and how much seagrass loss has occurred over time in the various estuaries that we cover. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Idavia, our Research and Outreach Manager, to share a few of the specific projects that the partnership is working on to contribute to water quality and wildlife habitat protection in our region, as well as ways that you can get involved and support our work. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so as Jennifer mentioned, thank you all for having us. I'm going to be talking to you all about a few of the projects that our partnership works on that we thought would be of interest to you all in Charlotte County specifically. So you've heard mention of this before, I think Brandon brought it up as well, was the Coastal Charlotte Harbor Monitoring Network. So this monitoring network actually began over 20 years ago. So the partnership has been collecting water quality data in Charlotte Harbor for 20 years, which is a fantastic base of data, and we're really excited to have Charlotte County expand upon some of the work that's been done by the monitoring network. So essentially, CHNEP manages and assists funding the monitoring network itself. So it's a regional partnership, so there's different entities that actually collect this data, from the state to the counties to different agencies. And so they collect and analyze water quality samples from over 60 sites throughout the Charlotte Harbor region that you're looking at. And we collect data about 15 different water quality parameters. So this is everything from how much oxygen is in the water, to how fresh or salty it is, all the way to what's the nitrogen levels, what's the bacteria levels, what's the phosphorus levels in this water quality information. And so this data is absolutely crucial for identifying water quality problems, establishing pollutant limits for those, the bacteria and for those nutrients that we just talked about, as well as monitoring progress of corrective actions that have been taken by these agencies, and it all depends on this available, accurate data. Okay, so once we collect that data, where does it go? So it goes into the state database that Melinda Brown just mentioned, but what we do with the CHNEP Water Atlas is we actually pull the data right back out of there and put it together with all of the publicly available water quality data onto the CHNEP Water Atlas. And then we also work with groups such as University of Florida, University of South Florida, to analyze this data and to put it all together, because again, one water quality sample is not going to tell you what you need to know. So looking at the data over the 20-year period and putting that into charts and graphs that are easily interpreted and publicly available to you all, to policymakers, to better understand what's going on with water quality right now, but also what's been going on with water quality over time. As Betty Stogler mentioned recently, though, it's not just about water quality data. It's also, we are looking at what's going on with seagrasses in Charlotte Harbor. We have an entire series of pages devoted to the seagrass data that's been painstakingly collected by partner agencies such as Melinda Brown's group at the Aquatic Preserves. We also have some great pages on habitat restoration needs plan that I'm about to talk about, as well as so basically areas that partners identify that are really critical to preserving in order to protect habitat in our region. So again, just Google CHNEP Water Atlas and it'll pop right up. And we have all of those tools, again, publicly available, easily accessible, easily interpretable, as a benefit to the partnership, but also to the public and you all. Okay, so this is the Charlotte Harbor. This is a project in partnership with the Charlotte Harbor Flatwoods Initiative, and so this is a hydrological restoration project. So we're actually undertaking several hydrological restoration projects within the CHNEP area, but this one's of interest to you all in Charlotte County. And so this project would restore more natural water levels in the CHNEP area, more specifically along the eastern wall of Charlotte Harbor. So natural water levels and flows to help those tidal creeks that are in that area, as well as throughout the 80,000 acres that are in that region. So this would be beneficial to Charlotte and Lee counties, hopefully reduce flooding, improve water quality, and then enhance that fish and wildlife habitat that we just talked about. Okay, so the Habitat Restoration Needs Plan, these are the habitat pages that I just mentioned are the CHNEP Water Atlas. So we worked with the members of the partnership to create a Habitat Restoration Needs Master Plan for the region, compiling all existing habitat plans and integrating climate science and habitat migration to identify areas that we need to preserve as important wildlife habitats moving forward. So again, what we're trying to do is, you can see those green areas are areas that are actually already preserved, and what we're trying to do is identify areas that are near those areas in blue, private areas that we could potentially preserve and create these wildlife corridors for really important species that we want to continue to see, including Florida scrub jay, Florida panther, things like that, so that they're around for generations to come. So again, you can find out more about that on the CHNEP Water Atlas. Okay, so CHNEP is also working to assist climate resiliency in the region. We previously worked with the City of Punta Gorda to produce the region's first climate adaptation plan way back in 2009. And then we assisted in its updating in 2019, as well as implementation for some of the projects that were identified that were really important for this region to help, be more resilient to increased storms that are coming through our region and things like that. So one of those projects, any of you that have walked down the Harbor Walk, is an oyster restoration project that you can actually see from the Harbor Walk. It's been in about almost 5 years now, and it's, again, continuing to thrive. And this was done in partnership with Nature Conservancy, with the city, with the county, but also with a lot of volunteers. And so, speaking about volunteers, we work to provide opportunities for the public to get informed and engaged, and to help and protect water and wildlife resources in their own communities, including free publications and events. So that CHNEP Water Atlas that I mentioned, we actually have a number of fact sheets available about water quality, about seagrasses, and they're on our table out front as well, that you're welcome to grab and look through. Their one-page fact sheets that are helping, hopefully that help inform ourselves, but also they're for sharing with other members of the public. It's important when we're talking about these areas to help other people understand them and understand why we want to protect them and what's going on with them as well. So again, we offer free magazines. We have an annual nature calendar. Please grab one. It's out there. It's available. There's actually a lot of great information about what's going on with seagrasses in the educational insert that's in the calendar. We also have a free kids activity book that's focused on sustainable fishing. And you can also find more of this information on the CHNEP website. Just go to chnep.org and hit subscribe. Okay, additionally, we offer free volunteer events in the Charlotte County region monthly. And so there's some of those listed right here. These are events that we've had recently. We've partnered with Sea Grant to do an Eyes on Seagrass citizen science training. We've partnered with the state to do horseshoe crab watch training. We've participated in the International Coastal Cleanup event. Some of you I see also participated in our Earth Echo water quality sampling events as well. So again, you can visit our website, chnep.org, and hit the Get Involved button and sign up to receive notifications about any of these events if you'd like to join us. They're all here in Charlotte County. And related to that, we are always looking for volunteers to assist us in community outreach in the 10 counties we serve. We try and attend festivals, providing educational material and activities, such as the popular Kids Fishing Clinic, at all of these areas that we serve, because water doesn't know boundaries, and so we're going to all these areas. Maybe some of these areas are not even getting as much educational information, and trying to provide that out. So anybody that wants to get involved in sort of an education side of things, we have a lot of opportunities related to that. And finally, we wanted to invite you all to our upcoming Climate Summit. So anyone that's interested in learning about how climate change or resiliency will affect this region, this is a two-day hybrid public event. So there'll be a virtual attendance option, there'll be an in-person attendance option. There's advanced registration is required. Again, just go to our website. There'll be a button right on the homepage where you can register for this great networking and learning opportunity to talk about a really important issue of our time. And with that, I just wanted to say thank you all again for having us here.
All right, thank you, and thank you all. panelists for session 3, and we're going to end this with just a few questions. I know we're running a little bit over time, but bear with me. I think some of these are pretty good. There's 2 broad categories of questions that were submitted, one of which I'll just address really quickly because I don't think it's within the scope of this session, but asking about what we do about nutrient inputs, pollutants coming in from upstream of Charlotte County. So real briefly, what I'm going to say about that is there are regulatory mechanisms in place where if impairments have been identified, we can work with the Department of Environmental Protection to try to address those, especially even if they come from upstream of us and are technically outside of the county's jurisdiction as a result. Those that did submit questions along those lines, I'll be happy to reach out to you more, or reach out to you in the future with more details on that. Something that I discussed quite a bit in the public information meetings. I'll be happy to share that with you all. The set of questions that I do want to pose to you guys, though, concerns education of new residents. So, as we all are very well aware, we've got a lot of growth occurring down in Southwest Florida. And people come here from all over the country. And our climate, our ecology, our landscape is somewhat unique compared to most other areas of the country. And so there is understandably a lack of knowledge from the local citizens or from citizenry when they move here about things as simple as swales and what do swales do and what's their purpose. And so a number of the questions that I received centered around whether or not there are education programs specifically focused on new residents, or if not, what sort of programs would you guide new residents towards to better understand, what what we have here and what they can do to protect water quality in this area.
There we go. Well, I'll take a swing at it. One being, extension's always been held as one of the greatest secrets of all time. We're here, we're there, but then again, people don't open. The storefront's not open sometimes to those that are not aware. We can, I can't speak for all 11 counties that I cover, but in some of the counties that we do have a program, a packet of information that we work with the realtors and with trying to interface those who are coming here to buy a home. We'll have that packet for that realtor to introduce to them. Now, I can't say how consistent that is across my region, but that is one of the forms that we're using. I mentioned master naturalists and master gardeners earlier, and that's one of our key liaisons to our communities, is having, we train the master gardeners and master naturalists locally at our extension office, and then they help disseminate the information. So those are key liaisons that we depend on within the community for extension outreach. Other than we'll have formal programs or informal programs and workshops.
All right, and I'll kind of piggyback on that too. By getting citizens involved with water quality monitoring, they become stewards and help generate an awareness and educate others and get them involved as well. So I agree that there does need to be a new kind of citizen, new homeowners for Charlotte County kind of initiative to educate people. What is an estuary? What are aquatic preserves? You know, all these different acronyms you guys hear, DEP, NEP, you know, who are we and who are all these entities? But we do all coordinate with each other, even though you've heard all these different programs. And I want people to understand that too. We're not, our water quality monitoring programs complement each other. We're not duplicating efforts, and that there are people. We monitor seagrasses, but Sea Grant also has a volunteer Eyes on Seagrass monitoring program that people can get involved with. But those are different times of the year, and they look at things differently than we do. So all these different aspects of who's conducting the monitoring and taking care of our estuaries, I think, is an important part of that. And on that pitch, I know we struggle a lot with reaching out to the local public because you get like a lot of people moving down. People are seasonal. They come, we educate them, they leave, and they may forget or they leave the area totally. So yeah, we have a Friends of Charlotte Harbor Aquatic Preserves. I see your t-shirt over there. So they've been help us spread the word. We have a board if you're interested in joining that effort. They meet once a month. They help us manage the aquatic preserves and do outreach. But again, one of the things I can recommend too, if you guys are utilizing the waterways, if you're a boater, take a safe boating class, learn about the depths, get a navigational chart, learn how to boat in our waterways. They're shallow. That's not a typical lake system that you have up north. You can easily run aground and damage our habitats. We have really shallow seagrasses and oysters that are very vulnerable to your boat propeller. And so a lot of our seagrass beds either we're losing or they're becoming damaged by boating. And so that's one of the things we pitch is, how to boat properly and that all the everyday actions you take at your home, whether you're using fertilizer, all the, that saying, all water drains to the ocean, into the estuary. So be cautious of your actions at home, even if you maybe don't fish or boat in our local waterways. Thank you.
I have a question. Is phosphate mining a threat to our water and our seagrass? Could you please answer that question? Is phosphate mining a threat to our water and seagrass? Yes or no?
It's a complicated question. So nutrients in general are not good for estuaries in an abundance. So one of the things I can say is that we've recently, with the loss of seagrass, contracted out an analysis of our seagrass monitoring data along with water quality information. It's in draft form right now, but once it's finalized, I would love to share it with you. What we're seeing right now is that it's really an increase in nitrogen that is causing a negative impact on our seagrasses, either through nitrogen is like feeding algae sugar. More nitrogen makes the algae bloom. We've had this persistent macroalgae bloom along the east wall of Charlotte Harbor, and what it looks like it's nitrogen, is what I can tell you right now based on the recent work.
What's the origin source of that nitrogen? Do you know?
So I know that there are a lot of questions about phosphate mining, and as Claire mentioned.
It's the elephant in the room, and you need to address it. Let the university expert talk about it, if he's brave enough.
Well, I can say a few words about that. I mean, Mindy, I think, covered it well, beginning that, and I mentioned earlier, atmospheric deposition is a major culprit that we're dealing with here, atmospheric deposition. So when you get a lightning strike in the atmosphere during a thunderstorm, it disassociates nitrogen in the air, returns it back down to the landscape. And that's the cycle of nitrogen. So we have particulate from combustion. We have particulate from organic debris that's breaking down. We have a lot of things going on activity-wise in our urban landscapes, which I had shown earlier. So from a nitrogen perspective, and there's about 8 different sources of nitrogen in our urban watershed that we've identified, that we can verify. There's tons more. We have rookeries. We have natural contributors that were here long before us that were continuing that nitrogen cycle. So I can't speak to that. Otherwise, I'm not the researcher that can debate that with you. I'm sorry. I'm just not that person.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
I'm not sure. Okay, I think it's working. I completely understand your concern, and basically we have been looking at all sources of nitrogen and phosphorus because both of them are problematic. Generally, freshwater systems are phosphorus limited and marine waters are nitrogen limited, meaning that those different types of nutrients can be more problematic in one system versus another. We happen to live in a very phosphorus-rich system as it is, and our estuaries are nitrogen limited, which means that typically is more the pollutant of concern. And if you look at DEP impairments as to water quality assessments, you'll see that that's what the state, when they look at what are the safe thresholds for swimming, fishing, shellfish harvesting, drinking, you'll see that the impairments tend to be more nitrogen focused in our estuaries. So that being said, is the investments like the county is making right now in wastewater upgrades are tremendous because they're really targeting that nitrogen. And nitrogen is much harder to remove than phosphorus because it's more dissolved, so it requires a lot more filtration. It's much more difficult to get out of aquatic ecosystems than phosphorus. So we are really supporting like the septic to sewer conversion, the wastewater upgrades. These are huge investments for this community to make, but we know will have a positive effect and reducing that nitrogen level, which is feeding these harmful algae blooms, which is fueling the seagrass decline. So we're very hopeful. It's not to say that other sources of nutrients aren't also problematic, but in every ecosystem, in every estuary, we find the balance of what source and what type of nutrient is most problematic to be different from system to system. And we work across the country and across Florida. We will say here in Charlotte Harbor, really looking at this nitrogen and trying to figure out how we can reduce that nitrogen input and remove the legacy that's bound in already in our sediments and in our waterways. That's the challenge we're facing right now.
Okay. So that is a conversation that I will be happy to have more separately, because that ties into a bit. I understand that, but I think that's worth a more focused conversation specific to phosphate mining. But I did want to circle back to the original question that we were discussing about education with residents or whatnot, and I didn't know if there were any other thoughts on that particular topic.
I would just say that I really appreciate the passion and interest that each of you have. And we are looking for people like you to grab friends, grab families, grab neighbors, and come to our monthly events, come to events like the Climate Summit, help to get the information out. We have free magazines and these calendars and whatnot that you can subscribe on our website. You can encourage others to. The more informed and engaged we're able to get the public behind these issues, the more resources we're able to get back to our community to tackle these problems. Because right now, I don't know how many of you were aware, but I mean, the National Estuary Program just a couple of years ago was proposed for elimination, which would have meant millions of dollars of funding that's currently going to water quality testing. All the things that we talked about would not have continued. So now we have, thankfully, a turn of events where we are getting continued congressional funding, but it's really the public being informed and engaged that is going to secure the resources and the actions needed and the political will needed to literally turn this tide of water quality degradation and seagrass decline. And I really encourage each of you to grab us after the event. We're happy to talk more. Thank you.
I think that's as good a place as any to stop. I want to thank our presenters, both session 3 and the other sessions, all of you for attending. Thank you very much for spending your day with us. This is certainly not the last time we're going to have meetings and discussions like this, and you've certainly not seen the last of me in a public forum. We'll have many more public information meetings as we continue progress on the One Charlotte, One Water plan. So thank you all very much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you all in the future.